So I, 27 female, was estranged from my deceased sister for 5 years after she had an affair with my fiance that I found out about and resulted in a pregnancy. I cut them out of my life and declared them dead to me. They had a child who's now a preschooler. I'm not sure exactly how old. I've never met the child. I never wanted to meet the child or be in their life. My parents knew their grandchild and supported the child while my sister and ex were alive. They were on and off after I left him. I heard from friends that their breakups were quite explosive. When they died in a car accident recently, people were shocked, but also kind of not, because many people assumed they were arguing and didn't focus on the road. So their child went into foster care. My parents tried to take them, but were denied for health and mobility. The child's paternal relatives didn't want to take the child. No surprises there. So my parents turned to me. I'm now engaged again to Luke, and we bought our forever home last year. We were stable and happy, and my parents believed that we should take their grandchild. I told them I would not be a good fit to raise the child, and I was sorry, but that was the end of the discussion. And as far as I was concerned, Luke told them he was with me on that. My parents went behind my back to try and talk him into it, but he told me and I told them to stop. They begged me again to reconsider and said, imagine how nice it would be to know my nibbling, to get to be there, to have a child who's part of our family, kept in our family, and raised lovingly around people who want the best for them. I told them that's not a job for me and to let it go. A few days went by and I thought they might have let it drop. Then they called me and told me to think about how good it will look for me, the betrayed sister and ex-fiance, to have enough love and compassion to raise the child that was conceived out of said betrayal and love them and be the best mom to that child who could exist. They said people would think I'm a saint and would always think of me as an incredible person. I told them I'm no saint and I don't want to be a saint. I don't need to be seen as some incredible, amazing person. I'm not going to raise their grandchild just to look good to other people, and they need to stop asking me to. They told me I was heartless and asked how I could not care at all about a child who's my own flesh and blood and who's been tossed around the system in just a few weeks because, according to them, the child has been in 4 homes already. They said I shouldn't be able to turn my back on family like this, and I should have more compassion for them, who were told by CPS that they wouldn't be allowed to raise their grandchild. Am I the idiot? OP, you are not the idiot. My youngest is adopted by a family member of mine. We were all in the day we knew we could be, and it's hard. We love him. He completed our family in a way we didn't know we needed, but it's not in any way easy to adopt a child from family. Taking on a child should only ever be done if you're 1000% in it. I know it sounds harsh, but you owe the child nothing. Their parents did them a huge disservice, not planning for a guardianship and a will. That's not on you to sort out. Raising a child you resent is not the right thing, no matter the circumstances. I'm not naive to the foster system. Most of my cousins and family spent much time in it, and we've been foster parents. But truly, you'd be doing that child a disservice if you took them in from guilt. It would be insulted by the fact that they think you should do it to look good. Exactly. OMG, that they even suggested what others think might be a possible motivation. I can't imagine a betrayed ex to be a good stepmother for an orphan child, at least when the person went no contact with the family of that betrayal. Sounds more like the ideal setup for an evil stepmother. As sad as it is, having the child at home reminds you of your ex and sister's betrayal and their death. I'm sorry for the grief they're putting you through. Apologies, as I don't mean to be unsympathetic, but wow, OP, your parents may be lying to you about not being able to adopt. That's got to be pretty severe medical restrictions to be turned down for kindred care. And in some cases, they would qualify for assistance care if they take in the child. Our neighbors are in their late 60s, and they both are partly disabled. He's an amputee, and they're raising young grandkids. Something in your parents' story doesn't add up. I am female 42 and have 3 children, male 25, female 18, and female teen. This situation concerns my son and his wife. About 5 years ago, my husband of 17 years, together for 26, passed away. It was very heartbreaking and hard for my children. For the past 4 years, my main focus has been on my children and working so I can support them. However, that has changed in the past 6 months because I've been seeing someone I met at a work event. I wasn't looking to rush anything, but he stayed by my side despite being rejected several times. Even though we're together, I clarified that I wasn't interested in getting married or our families meeting each other anytime soon, which he agreed with. Anyway, yesterday my partner decided to take me out. He treated me to dinner and took me shopping at little boutiques, which was incredibly kind of him. While I was spending time with him, my daughter-in-law saw me without my knowledge, and it was evident that this man was my partner. When I came home, I saw my son and daughter-in-law in the living room waiting for me. They immediately confronted me and kept asking several questions about who my partner was. I was upfront and told them I'd been seeing him for the past 6 months, which resulted in a huge argument, with my son telling me that I was betraying his father. I yelled that I wouldn't spend the rest of my life alone because he didn't like the idea of me dating someone who wasn't his father. I then told them that what I do with my life is not their concern, as I'm an adult, and who I date or go out with isn't their concern. This caused them to leave and complain to my late husband's mother, who has never liked me and is now calling me very rude names. Am I the idiot? Not the idiot. If they don't like that you have a new partner, spend every evening and every weekend at your sons and daughter-in-laws so you won't be alone. Just get involved in their love life and return the favor. The intruding way. Ask how many date nights they have, who gets presents, how often, does she go to the hairdresser before, does he wear a suitable cologne, etc. See if they like getting scrutinized and controlled. Ask daughter-in-law's mother about her personal love life as well. They'll end up begging you to be with your partner. They need the same energy they're putting out. Also, OP fulfilled her marriage vows. Why is it not okay to seek a companion? If, God forbid, your daughter-in-law passed away, would your son stay single for the rest of his life? I doubt it. He can have feelings for you moving on, but those feelings are his to handle. You haven't done anything wrong. You can move on and be happy. Her husband has been gone for 5 years. It's a huge double standard, especially when children are involved. And for me, it stems from traditional, outdated family roles. Men are encouraged to find a new partner who will give their kids the motherly love they're missing out on. Women are expected to put all their focus on their children, and their spending time in the dating realm is seen as putting themselves before their children. So I, teen male, am on vacation with my family. The people on the trip are me, my parents, my Aunt Jen, and my cousins, Oliver, tween, and Luna, young grammar school. My mom is super airline savvy, so she managed to get us all seated together in a line. My parents and I were on one side of the aisle, and my aunts and cousins were across from us. Anyway, I brought my tablet, which I bought with my own money, on the flight, so I could watch Netflix, as it was a pretty long flight. About 20 minutes after takeoff, Luna starts fussing with her mom about something. I turn up the volume on my headphones. Then I feel a tap on my shoulder from Luna, who has the aisle seat. I'm also in the aisle seat. Dialogue is rough since my memory isn't the best. Luna: "Hey, mommy said I can play on your tablet. Give it to me." Me: "No, I'm using it right now. If you ask nicely when I'm done with my episode." Luna: "But she said I could." Me: "I don't care." Luna: Huff: "Mommy, I can play with my name's tablet, right?" Jen: "That's right, honey." Luna: "See? She said so." Me: "It's my tablet, not your mom's. She can't make me give it to you like she can with Oliver. Now leave me alone." I then put my headphones back on and turn the volume up again, drowning out any more whining. About 20 minutes later, my dad taps me on the shoulder and asks if my episode is over, because my cousins are getting pretty noisy and my aunt needs a break. I can definitely hear both of them whining and borderline yelling at my aunt that they're bored. Here's where I might be the idiot. I decided that I wanted to keep watching my show and that entertaining my cousins wasn't my job. I say that if Luna can ask nicely, she and Oliver can play for 10 minutes, knowing full well that Luna won't ask nicely because she's spoiled. Jen, hey, Luna, ask my name nicely if you can play. Luna, my name, can I play? Me, what's the magic word? Luna, give it. Me, sorry, that's not the magic word. You don't get to play. I put my headphones back on and turned the volume back up, keeping it that way for the rest of the flight, save for a few times when my parents asked me to give my cousins another chance, to which I said no. After the flight, my mom said that what I did was petty and made things unnecessarily difficult for my aunt on the flight. I know what I did was petty, but does it make me an idiot? Not the idiot. Your aunt is teaching your cousins to be entitled, and your parents are enabling her. Good job for standing your ground. Seriously, what sane person brings two young kids on a flight without having a carry-on bag full of activities? Tablet, handheld video games, books, coloring books, card games, travel-sized board games. So many options. Someone needs to teach Auntie Jay and her kids some manners. How does Aunt Jay think she can give permission to use something that isn't hers? And Luna hasn't a clue about politely asking. Well, how would she? Her mom can't teach her how to behave because she doesn't know how to herself. Good on you for showing them that their tactics don't work. Yes, this was my observation too. Aunt Jay doesn't have boundaries, and Luna hasn't learned how to be polite or execute good manners. Bad manners should not be rewarded. OP, ask your parents why they didn't hand over their smartphones to make your aunt's flight easier if it was so important to them. Let's start with some context. I'm renting a room in a 4-bedroom house. Life's difficult right now, and this is the best I can afford. The other 3 rooms are occupied by people I didn't know before moving in, each paying their own rent, including a couple that sleeps in the larger room. Since the house is shared, we have free access to the shared spaces, like the kitchen and lounge, and we try to respect each other. One relevant thing is that the couple and a person in another room were already friends before moving in, so they spend much time together and do stuff for each other. All is good with me. I'm out most of the day working, and usually, when I cook dinner for myself, I cook a bit extra to take to work the next day and save some money. For example, the other day, I had some chicken breast cut into bits, seasoned with some lemon herbs, and left to marinate. Fry that up with some veggies, add some noodles, and it's a pretty decent meal. On this particular occasion, my coworkers had planned a team lunch for the next day, so there was no point in me cooking that usual extra. Since the marinated chicken smelled pretty good, I thought it would taste even better the following day when I cooked it for dinner again. I got a bowl, placed it all there, covered it with cling film, and left it in the refrigerator, where my refrigerator stuff usually is. We do this so everyone knows who owns what in the refrigerator. Never thought about it again. The following day when I got home, a couple of people from the other rooms were kind of waiting for me in the lounge and just started screaming at me. So the girl from the couple I mentioned earlier is a sleepwalker, and that has never been a major issue until now, save from the occasional noise during the night, but nothing that could be considered annoying. You might see where this is going, though. Last night she got up, still sleeping, walked to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and helped herself to a spoonful of marinated chicken. She then went back to bed, where she eventually felt ill and had to be taken to the hospital. Now they're acting like it's my fault, because since I know she's a sleepwalker, I should be more careful with stuff like this and not leave the uncooked chicken on the refrigerator like that. I never thought that that would be a problem. As I said before, we have specific areas for each of us, and we try to be mindful of what we leave there. The chicken was properly covered, and it wouldn't be a problem in any other circumstance. I tried to argue this, but now they want me to apologize to her and helped to pay for the hospital bill, which, to be honest, I really don't feel like I should. Plus, I'm down one meal, as the rest of the chicken was just thrown out, and I was really looking forward to it. Not the idiot. Oh wow, that didn't go as I expected. She needs help with her sleepwalking. It's completely normal to marinate raw chicken in the fridge, assuming you're following food safety, and it sounds like you were. However, it is not normal to eat it while sleepwalking. If she was sleepwalking, how does anyone know she had a spoonful and wrapped it back up? Are you supposed to cook all raw meat immediately upon purchasing it, since you don't know how picky sleepwalkers will be when they raid the fridge? This is all BS. She probably only went to the hospital because she was paranoid after realizing what she ingested after she stole some. By this logic, no laundry detergent, dish soap, hand soap, cleaning sprays, etc. should be stored in the house. Who knows what she might eat? I would definitely expect them to reimburse you or replace your chicken breast, and they should be talking to her sleep doctor about addressing issues caused by sleepwalking. If, as I suspect, that's a BS excuse, she messed around and found out. Diddums. This happened at a potluck. I brought a tofu dish, stir-fried with minced pork, ginger, and spring onions. Similar to Mapo tofu, but not spicy. Everything was fine, except when someone asked me if my dish was halal. I said no, it has pork. That's when Jen overheard and freaked out that she ate meat. And it turns out many other vegetarians ate my dish, assuming it was vegetarian. For the rest of the party, I had so many people, including non-vegetarians, tell me I was an idiot for putting meat in a vegetarian dish. But this is a dish I grew up with. Tofu for me is just an ingredient, not strictly a meat substitute. Also, no one asked me if my dish was vegetarian. So, am I the idiot? Or are people just overreacting? Edit. Nothing was labeled. I just left the dish on the buffet table along with the rest of the dishes. There were many other meat dishes. About 20 people were at the party. 4 were vegetarian. No one asked about my dish, except for the person asking if it was halal. They assumed it was a vegetarian dish because they had a weird misconception that tofu exists only for vegetarians. That they didn't bother to ask is on them. You are not the idiot. Chinese tofu dishes and other vegetable dishes often contain pork to add flavor. It's not your fault they didn't know that, and I bet they've accidentally eaten pork at Chinese food places since they didn't know. Absolutely. I'm a vegetarian and made the mistake of not asking when I ordered a tofu dish from a very traditional Chinese restaurant. The menu was predominantly in a Chinese dialect, with only the briefest description in English. I didn't blame the restaurant. I just ordered something different and paid for both dishes. It's not anyone's fault that I didn't ask first. That's the mature way to deal with it. I've been a vegetarian for 15 years. How do you not notice pork of all things in a dish? It's ridiculous if you get angry for just assuming something doesn't contain meat. You can be disgruntled, disappointed, or a bit disgusted, but most of all, you should take it as a lesson to ask next time and pay more attention. Anyway, I live in an extremely health-conscious area and know several people with allergies, so I've started to list ingredients with dishes that I bring to potlucks. I do that when bringing food for large groups. I make some vegan cake, usually, make a flag label out of freezer labels and cocktail sticks, list all ingredients with the known allergens in caps and underlined. Simples. Luckily, I was nearby when someone said they'd have a piece of the vegan sponge cause they need gluten-free. I shouted across that it was not gluten-free. My label clearly showed wheat flour on it. What more can you do if folks won't ask and don't read the labels provided? Dear God, you'd think someone who needs to eat gluten-free would know it's different from vegan. But then again, some people seem to be allergic to common sense.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
I'm not stupid, just a bit thick sometimes. But just for the record, I'm technically a genius, at least according to Mensa. I took their test once, mostly because my wife challenged me to, and I passed. But I've never really fit in with that crowd. Anyway, that's where the story really begins. I met my wife back when I was a student at the University of Texas. I was enrolled in the honors program at the McCombs School of Business, which is consistently ranked among the top 10 business schools in the nation. But I was also part of Plan 2, which, while less known, is even more exclusive. It's an interdisciplinary liberal arts program that's been around since the 1930s, with only about 100 students accepted each year. The program was intense. We took specialized, advanced versions of the university's core courses, which ended up forming our major. These classes were taught by top scholars and were incredibly intimate. My freshman English class had just 9 students, while my American history course had 15. Both counted toward my major. Since Plan 2 covers your major requirements in the first 2 years, the last 2 are essentially wide open. Most students chose to double major. For me, that meant adding a business degree on top of it. Plan 2 likes to boast that it's Ivy League quality, and to be fair, it really is. But it's also full of pretentious intellectuals. That's where I met Jacqueline. For her, it was love at first sight. For me, well, it took a bit longer. It wasn't that she wasn't attractive. She absolutely was. In fact, by anyone's standards, she was stunning, and in the world of Plan 2, she might as well have been Miss Universe. But my issue was with the atmosphere. I couldn't stand the Plan 2 pretentiousness. Sure, I loved the classes and the professors, but I've always found that intellectuals can be so wrapped up in their own brilliance that they become completely clueless. McCombs wasn't much better. The place was full of people constantly trying to outshine one another, not just with how smart they were, but also with bragging rights about the prestigious jobs they were bound to land or how quickly they'd hit their second million. It was like a parade of peacocks, with egos so inflated there was hardly room left for my own, which is, admittedly, a bit more modest. Despite my reservations, I had to attend those faculty teas and luncheons. That's where you rubbed shoulders with professors, and more importantly, where they got to know you. If you wanted those all-important letters of recommendation, skipping them wasn't an option. Jacqueline wasn't in McCombs, but she started showing up at those events as well as at the Plan 2 gatherings. I only realized this later when she told me. Honestly, I didn't truly notice her until she came to one of my rugby matches. Rugby isn't an official UT sport, but the Department of Recreation sponsors the club team. We not only get to play against other Big 12 teams, but also compete for a national title with universities across the country. We always had a great time with rugby, but let's be honest, a big crowd for our games was usually just our girlfriends cheering us on. Jacqueline had been chasing me for nearly a year when, finally, I experienced my own love at first sight moment with her. She had the most striking shade of red hair, paired with the fairest skin imaginable. And her figure, wow, it was enough to make me lose focus during a scrum, which is pretty much the worst thing a hooker can do. After that game, which we lost to Rice, I gathered up the courage to walk over and introduce myself. It was one of the scariest things I'd ever done. You see, Jacqueline stands a statuesque 5 feet 11 inches, and I'm just 5 feet 3 inches, even in my thickest shoes. I'm built like a hooker because, well, I am one, compact and powerful. And yes, I've heard all the short jokes, as well as the ones about rugby hookers and street hookers. None of them are funny, at least not to me. Sure, I'm compact, but I'm also one of the fastest and strongest players on the team. Not just pound for pound, but overall. People have accused me of having a Napoleon complex because of my height. I don't see it that way. In first grade, I made a decision. If anyone mistook compact for inadequate, they'd regret it. Growing up, I was always a solid athlete, as great as a 5 feet 3 inches, 120-pound guy could be. That meant I consistently made varsity, but I was rarely a starter. An athletic scholarship was never even a distant dream. But Jacqueline made me feel like I was 6 feet tall, even when she wore 3-inch heels. Honestly, I loved it when she wore those heels. They showcased her perfect legs, but more importantly, it was proof that my height truly didn't matter to her. Jacqueline was my dream girl, and from the moment she smiled at me, I was completely, hopelessly hers. Jacqueline came from a humble background in deep East Texas. Her father, who worked in the oil fields, was injured on the job and later died in a drunk driving accident when Jacqueline was in second grade. Her mother worked as an office clerk at a small insurance agency. Jacqueline was attending UT on a full academic scholarship, though she probably could have qualified for a needs-based one too if she'd needed it. We officially met in the fall of my junior year, and by midterm of my senior year, we were married. The only thing we ever argued about was sex. I was ready for it on our first date, but Jacqueline wasn't. At that point, I was still a virgin. She was not. Before Jacqueline, I had always been the pal every girl confided in. I went on dates, sure, but they usually ended up with me listening to my date talk about the guy she really wanted to be with. I know I could have had sympathy sex if I wanted, but I was holding out for a girl who genuinely wanted me. Jacqueline told me she'd had one serious boyfriend in high school. She was convinced they'd get married, but when she found him cheating, she made a solemn vow to herself. No more sex until marriage. Honestly, I don't know if we would have made it if she hadn't defined sex strictly as vaginal intercourse. She was incredible at everything else, but that also made me respect her even more. She kept her word. Her promises genuinely mattered to her. There were definitely moments before we got married when I could tell she wanted me just as much as I wanted her, but she never let her desires get the best of her. Her self-control and integrity not only deepened my admiration for her, but also inspired me to be just as committed. We didn't have our first real argument until after we were married, but when it finally happened, it was a big one. Jacqueline had assumed all along that I would go to work for my parents after graduation. I do love my folks. They own 4 franchises down in Houston. Not McDonald's, but definitely a brand you've probably heard of or seen advertised on TV. Each location nets about $75,000 to $100,000 a year, so they're comfortable, not Texas oil-rich, but certainly well off. My dad had plans to expand but couldn't do it without a trustworthy manager, and to him, trustworthy meant family. That, in his mind, meant me. I'm 4 years older than my sister, who had been set on becoming a doctor since kindergarten, so the role fell to me. He offered a generous incentive package to entice us to move back to Houston. But I didn't want that life. I loved Austin, the vibe, the culture, and besides, I had already set my sights on a small, up-and-coming tech company there. It wasn't Dell, but I was convinced they had a better business model. I was eager to take a chance on it. However, when Jacqueline saw the offer from my dad, she reconsidered her objections. The incentive package was too good to pass up, and as soon as she graduated, we bought our first house and moved to Houston. Life was good for a while, but as Dell grew, the startup I joined faltered. Eventually, I found myself out of a job for the first time. Thankfully, I had cashed out my stock options early, so I decided it was the perfect opportunity to go back to school and get my MBA. I chose Wharton, completed the program in 2 years, and landed a fantastic job with one of the big banks back in Austin. We were back on top, catching the wave of Austin's real estate booms and busts, and eventually settled into a big house out by the lake. We had 2 kids, and our garage had matching his and hers BMWs. Life, for a while, was everything we dreamed it could be. After 10 years of marriage, I reached a breaking point. I realized I was done with chasing multimillions and tired of working for someone else. So, I made a big decision. I told Jacqueline I wanted to start my own business. I took most of our liquid savings and bought a franchise, the same brand my dad owned. I had never actually worked in one of his stores before, and I quickly learned that running one was far more work than I anticipated. In the beginning, we didn't pull in the profits my dad's stores did, but we were still comfortable. However, what I didn't share with Jacqueline was my real motivation. Deep down, I wanted to write. That old plan to itch for intellectual and creative pursuits had finally caught up with me. Once I had the franchise running smoothly, I spent more and more time holed up in my office, writing. I didn't want Jacqueline to know about my crazy dream until I had something tangible to show for it. Something published, something that could prove I wasn't just chasing a delusion. But from her perspective, all she could see was that we were making only a fraction of what I used to earn, and I wasn't putting any effort into expanding the business. Meanwhile, we were surrounded by a hyper-competitive social circle. Even in Austin's laid-back atmosphere, we were living among billionaires and those who measured success by the size of their houses, boats, and luxury cars. For me, though, the thrill of keeping up with that crowd had faded. I didn't care about winning the toy race anymore. But to be fair, I made that decision unilaterally. I never sat down with Jacqueline to discuss it, and she never agreed to it. That's when the fighting started. It lasted almost a year, turning our home into a constant battleground. And then, almost as suddenly as it began, the fighting stopped. But along with the arguments, something else disappeared. The warmth, the intimacy, the affection. Sex became a rare event, but at the time, I didn't think much of it. I was so focused on my writing, I never suspected a thing. I'm not oblivious. I knew money was important to Jacqueline, but I genuinely believed I could bring in a good income as a writer. If I had actually done my research on what most writers earn, I might have had second thoughts, but sometimes ignorance really is bliss. I threw myself into my new passion, finishing my first book and starting the long process of finding an agent. By the time I completed my second book, agents were finally starting to return my emails. Then, after wrapping up my third book, I got the call every aspiring writer dreams of. A publisher wanted to buy all three. Even better, they offered me a $30,000 advance for each one. For an unpublished writer, that was like hitting a grand slam. I was over the moon. I had a little voice recorder I used for practicing dialogue, so I even recorded the publisher's offer. I wanted to share the excitement with Jacqueline in the most dramatic way possible. I called her up, thrilled, and told her to book a babysitter and put on her best dress. We were going out to celebrate with dinner at Green Pastures, one of the finest restaurants in Austin. But her lukewarm response should have set off alarm bells. Jacqueline not being excited about an impromptu midweek date to the best place in town? That alone should have triggered warning flares. We arrived at Green Pastures early enough to see the peacocks wandering the grounds, and were seated in a beautifully intimate room with a perfectly set table. I ordered their signature milk punch, while Jacqueline opted for a margarita. I could feel the tension radiating off Jacqueline throughout dinner, but I was too caught up in my own excitement to pay much attention. I had planned to reveal my big news during dessert, to surprise her with the good news about the book deal. But then her phone rang. I watched her answer with an irritated tone. "We're at dinner." "You're kidding." "Here? Now?" she said, her voice shifting between annoyance and something else. "No, not until this weekend." Then, suddenly, she giggled. She continued, "No, I told you how I wanted to do it. I can't. Please, Harold, not here." She let out a frustrated sigh and listened for a moment before saying, "Are you sure? Just like we practiced?" Her face grew tense, her expression hardening in a way I'd never seen before. I had my little recorder in hand, ready to play the publisher's message for her, but an instinct made me hit the record button instead when she started speaking to Harold. "Okay," she finally said, her voice cold. "But you'd better be here. This is going to be ugly." "Okay, I love you too." She hung up and turned to me with an expression that cut right through me, a mix of disdain and something almost cruel. "I'm leaving you," she announced flatly, her eyes locked on mine. "I can't stay married to a loser. I've been having an affair for the past 6 months, and all you've got now is my sloppy seconds. I despise you. I only married you because I thought you'd make it big, but you're nothing but a failure." Her words came out like daggers. "And no," she added with a cruel laugh, "nothing about you is big. You have the smallest," she paused for emphasis, relishing every word, "the smallest I've ever seen on a grown man. I'm shocked you even managed to get me pregnant." She leaned in, her voice dripping with contempt. "You're so short, I don't trust you to be alone with the kids. How could you protect them if some kindergarten bully showed up? You're too little, in every sense. That's why I'm not going to allow you any custody. They've already been shortchanged by inheriting your DNA. I won't let them be poisoned further by your pathetic, tiny ambitions." It was like the ground had opened up beneath me. I was stunned, utterly blindsided, and in that moment, the celebration I had envisioned turned into a nightmare. I'm not naive. I knew Jacqueline married me for the potential she saw in my career, for where she thought I could take her. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night. The sudden shift from her usual demeanor after that phone call was jarring. I didn't react as she'd expected because I couldn't wrap my head around how quickly everything had turned. It felt like a switch had flipped. Then it hit me. She was trying to provoke me, to push me into losing my temper in public. She knew I had a hair-trigger temper about certain things, though I'd never once raised a hand to her. And here she was, banking on me snapping right there in that restaurant. But instead of taking the bait, I kept my composure and said, with as much sincerity as I could muster, "Jacqueline, I love you. Why are you doing this?" Her face contorted into an ugly, venomous sneer, and her voice rose to a near shout, drawing the attention of everyone around us. "I was willing to tolerate your pathetic little limp excuse for a manhood as long as you were going places," she spat. "I've told you countless times, I won't be some lower-middle-class housewife, but you never listened. And if that wasn't bad enough, you're utterly clueless in bed. All you ever want to do is poke me with that pitiful pencil for 5 seconds. I've hated every minute of it. Years of playing sports had taught me how to stay calm under pressure, and I clung to that skill now." I wasn't entirely sure why she was raising her voice so loudly, but I noticed the maitre d' inching closer, ready to intervene if things escalated further. I tried to keep my voice calm, though every muscle in my body was tense. "Jacqueline, lower your voice, or we're going to get thrown out of here," I said evenly. "I love you. I've never been unfaithful, and even if you have, I'm willing to work through this." She was practically shaking with fury now, her breath coming in harsh, angry gasps. My refusal to lose my temper was clearly driving her mad. but she did drop her voice to a hiss. The only thing to work out, tiny tallywhacker, is how much time you'll get with the kids and how much you're willing to pay for it, she snarled. I kept my expression as neutral as possible, clenching my jaw to hold back my rising anger. Have the kids ever been in the house while you've entertained your real man? For a brief moment, she seemed thrown off, but then her eyes glinted with malice. Of course, she sneered. I just told them Mommy found a happy machine when they heard me screaming with joy. I took a deep breath, my voice as cold as ice. Jacqueline, I heard you making plans with him to pick you up. I'm going home now, and tomorrow I'll help you move out. I won't tolerate that behavior around my children. From now on, all our discussions will be through our lawyers. Her face twisted into something almost unrecognizable, a mask of pure hatred. I'm going to take you for everything you've got, she spat. Years of pretending deserve compensation. I'm going to marry Harold. He's 6 feet 1 inch, a successful pediatrician, and he can afford the best. If you even think about fighting for custody, I'll bankrupt you. I turned off the recorder and said softly, I can't believe you're this reckless. I know you're after the money, but don't you realize that any man who would cheat with you will do the same to you? He's not going to fight for kids he doesn't want, and if he does marry you, I'll bet you $10,000 it won't last 2 years. I stood up and walked over to the maitre d'. I handed him my credit card and asked him to run it right away, as I'd be canceling it in 10 minutes. Jacqueline had already grabbed her things and sashayed out the door by the time the manager returned with the receipt. He was an acquaintance from local restaurant association meetings. He gave me a sympathetic look and whispered, I'm sorry, but I couldn't help overhearing. Do you know that the best divorce lawyer in Austin is dining here tonight? She's trying to stay under the radar, but if I were you, I'd speak to her before you leave. It's almost impossible to get an appointment with her at her office. I was still in shock. I hadn't thought about what to do next, but the manager gestured to a smartly dressed couple at a table nearby. The man was old enough to be her father, but she was about my age. I recognized her immediately. She'd taken my friend, Alan Burke, to the cleaners in a divorce that was like something out of an old country song. She got the gold mine and I got the shaft. Noticing my gaze, she glanced up and gave me a sympathetic look, though her body language clearly said, please don't bother me while I'm eating. But I wasn't deterred. I slid a business card onto her table and said, I don't want to ruin your dinner, but I'd appreciate the chance to speak with you whenever you can fit me into your schedule. She let out a deep sigh and said, I'm very expensive. I nodded and cut her off, I know, but my friend Alan Burke learned the hard way. It's even more expensive to have you sitting across the table from him. Do you have any cash on you? She asked cryptically. I rarely carry cash, but I checked my wallet and found a freshly broken 20. She reached in, took my 10, leaving me with a couple of ones and said, okay, you've hired me. Now go home, keep your cool, and do not let her push you out of the house. I'll be there after I finish dinner. I hate seeing ambushes like this. Do you know who her lawyer is? I didn't know we were in trouble, I replied. I didn't know she was having an affair. I just set this up to tell her about my book deal. Have you signed the contract yet? No, I just heard back. Don't sign it until I give you the go-ahead. You don't want that to become community property. Dad, can you handle this? George here needs my help. You don't remember me, do you, George? I looked at her again. I knew I'd seen her before, but aside from Alan's divorce, I didn't think we'd ever actually met. Austin isn't a huge social scene, but it has its divides. Politicians, lawyers, and the like tend to run in different circles from the high-tech crowd I was used to. I hadn't been out much the past 3 years, so while I recognized her, I was still trying to place her name. Seeing my struggle, she smiled and said, I'm Martha White. We were in Plan 2 in McCombs together. Not many of us did both. I thought you might remember me. She grabbed my arm and led me out of the restaurant. Where are you parked? I pointed to my SUV, which was now visibly damaged, with at least 2 flat tires. They really aren't playing fair, are they? Are your kids at home? I told her the kids were at home as she guided me to her car, driving at full speed toward my house. When we arrived, she handed me money for the babysitter and instructed me, go to your computer, close your accounts, and start transferring cash to your business accounts. It's still community property, but draining that account could be considered illegal, and I doubt her lawyer would let that slide. I'll wait for the happy couple to get here. I was finishing up when Martha came back into the room. They weren't as well prepared as they should have been. I think they jumped the gun. They had planned this for later but decided tonight was too perfect to pass up. They made a big mistake leaving the house together. I want you to call a locksmith and have all the locks changed tonight. Disable the garage door opener. Do you have anyone you completely trust to take care of your kids? I paused for a moment before replying. My sister lives in Georgetown. It'll take her about a half hour to get here. She's on staff at Scott and White Clinic in Temple. I trust her with the kids. Great. How old is your youngest? Cindy will be 3 next month, and Josh is almost 5. He'll start kindergarten in the fall. Scott and White is a prestigious place. What does your sister do there? She's a neonatal specialist. She just finished her residency at Johns Hopkins and has a son the same age as Cindy. Great. Get that locksmith out here ASAP. Do you think your sister would drop everything and come at this hour? I felt a wave of humiliation wash over me. Let's just say Jacqueline wasn't exactly one of her favorite people. She might not drive quite as fast as you did, but she'll be here in no time. And while she'll never say it aloud, expect more than a few "I told you so's." Martha's expression softened. It's situations like this that keep me from ever getting married. I guess I've become numb to it after all these years, but look, would it offend you if I prayed for you? I was taken aback, truly seeing Martha for the first time as someone who genuinely cared. I gave her a nervous nod, and she continued, I suspect they're going to call it a night. But if they reach out to their lawyer, your wife will be back here fast, so we can't claim desertion. I pulled a pretty big bluff. I told them that you didn't want either of them in the house, and that you'd call the police if they tried to come in. I did manage to get something close to that out of you on the way over, but legally, you don't have grounds to deny her access to the house unless she leaves voluntarily. Trying to lighten the mood, I cracked a joke. With the way you drive, I would have offered half my kingdom to get you to slow down. She gave me one of those looks, one that seems to be ingrained in every woman's DNA, and ignored my attempt at humor. They're being a mix of smart and stupid, which is why I'm betting they're working without guidance. I'm pretty sure I know the sleazy attorney advising them, and believe me, no lawyer I know would be worth a joke. If they were following his advice, he would have been at the restaurant with a photographer in tow. The bottom line is, if she leaves tonight, you might be able to claim desertion. My sister arrived, impressed by my restraint, and couldn't resist offering a few choice comments about Jacqueline that she'd been holding onto for years. She took the kids with her, and the locksmith arrived shortly after, changing the locks and the garage code. Martha connected to her office from my computer, printed some papers, and had me sign them, including her contract. I couldn't help but shudder at the amount I'd already spent tonight. As she was leaving, I remembered the recording of Jacqueline's words. Handing it to her felt like handing a shark its teeth, unsettling, even if the shark was on my side. The divorce turned into a costly and contentious affair. Jacqueline got more than I thought she deserved, but I gained full physical custody of the kids. She didn't even get visitation rights, although I informally agreed to give her full access whenever she wanted, as long as she notified me and kept them on my property. The day the court session ended, everything was packed, and we were headed to Ireland. I rented a small, secluded cottage near Doolin on the west coast, a perfect spot if you love traditional Irish music. I enrolled the kids in the local school and quickly settled into the rhythm of life in the local pubs. One of the perks of being a writer is the freedom to work from anywhere, and I could easily justify living in such a unique place as a research expense for my work. Studying local culture, of course. It took Jacqueline and a lot of her new husband's money nearly 6 months to track me down. When she called, I agreed to let her visit the kids, but warned her that we were in the middle of packing and leaving the next morning. Our household goods were already gone. I suggested she wait until we were settled in our new place, and promised to notify her once we were settled. I figured it would take about as long for her to find me as it would for us to get fully settled, and I ended the call before remembering to tell her where we were moving. In the meantime, I'd written a bestseller. No, it didn't hit #1, but it did make it to the second-to-last spot on the New York Times bestseller list for a week. It was about an Austin pediatrician who secretly was a sex offender, a truly despicable character. One reviewer even called my villain one of the all-time greats. For some reason, Jacqueline's husband, the pediatrician, lost a significant portion of his practice right after the book came out. He was forced to abandon his career and relocate to Lubbock, where he joined the staff at the medical school. 3 months later, Jacqueline and her husband's money found me again. We had moved to the Scottish Highlands, about 100 miles north of Inverness, near John O'Groats. I apologized for not reaching out sooner and explained that just when we were nearly settled, I discovered I had developed an allergy and we were in the middle of moving again. I told her the house was packed, and we were leaving that very afternoon to tour the Algarve in search of a new place. I promised to contact her once we were settled. After I hung up, it dawned on me that I'd never had any allergy issues in Ireland, and besides, they spoke English there. So, I decided to try a small town along the southern coast this time. One of the perks of being a best-selling author doing local research in a remote place is that strangers tend to stand out. Locals, wary of most outsiders, are surprisingly accepting of eccentric writers. They'll often give you a heads up if someone starts asking too many questions. I had nearly a full week's notice in Scotland, for example. My next book also made the bestseller list, landing third from the bottom and staying there for 2 weeks. It was about a sinister sex offender pediatric professor from Austin who had secured a job at a medical school in Lubbock. This character was also conducting unauthorized experiments on his students, leaving them sterile and impotent. As luck would have it, Jacqueline's husband, the pediatrician, seemed to have no interest in either working in a medical school or in saving their relationship. He switched careers and joined the public health service. Another strange coincidence. I had just about decided that my next book would center around a scandal involving a former medical school professor turned public health worker. There's an old saying about never picking a fight with an organization that buys ink by the barrel. Or maybe it was the pen is mightier than the sword. Either way, it felt like I was writing from a place of uncanny inspiration. I did stay in touch with Austin, though. That relentless divorce lawyer kept following me. She started flying in to visit when I was living in Ireland the first time, then followed me to Scotland, and then back to Ireland. She was worse than Alamy Cricket. I had to listen to endless rants about keeping the kids from their mother, though she never put it that way. She'd recount cases where the mother had ducked out and isolated the kids from a good father. I wasn't oblivious, so it annoyed me after a while. But, Lord, that woman's kisses could make my toes tingle. After nearly a year, the way she said hello over the phone in that sultry tone was almost enough to make me lose control. Maybe it was just the fact that I'd been holding back for so long. At first, I wasn't interested in women at all, but Martha had a way of getting under my skin. What is it about me that seems to attract women who are against premarital sex? At least Martha shared the same interpretation of that rule as Jacqueline did. About 18 months after my divorce, I returned to Austin. Martha had finally put her foot down. I knew she despised Jacqueline, but she told me that what I was doing with the kids was immoral, and she wouldn't get engaged to an immoral man. I make a lot of money from men trying to be a daddy to their kids when the wife and her new love move off to Timbuktu. I think that's evil. It doesn't look any better when a man does it. Your game's cute, and I don't care what you do to that bitch, but she will always be their mother. We can't change that. You're within your legal rights, but is it moral? She had me, and she knew it. There's no denying how much less appealing that shark smile is when it's accompanied by gloating. I'd like to think I responded solely to Martha's moral argument, but it might have also been the comment she made about her biological clock giving her fits. She insisted that her kids were going to be born and raised as Texans. So, I proposed to her at a castle I'd rented for a weekend visit. We were married at her childhood church near El Paso. The moving truck had just backed into the driveway of our new house by the lake in Austin when Jacqueline called me on my cell. She was desperate, crying, and begging to see her children. I guess some of my anger had faded over time, or maybe I was just getting soft in my old age. Then again, it could have been the look Martha was giving me. Either way, I agreed to let Jacqueline see the kids, and less than a minute later, she knocked on the door. I wasn't really surprised. It had been a long game of cat and mouse, but she knew who to thank for me no longer playing. When I opened the door, I said, "Here are the ground rules. You'll be monitored electronically. First, if you say one bad thing about me, I'll move to Timbuktu and you'll never see them again. Second, if I get the faintest hint of you challenging custody, we're gone. However, if you follow my rules, I'll let you be a part of their lives from now on. I'll help you repair your relationship with them. You can attend all their games and school activities. Do you agree? Yes or no? That's the last word I ever want to hear from you." With tears in her eyes, she nodded and said, "Yes." She turned to Martha and mouthed, "Thank you." I have to admit, I'd felt pretty rotten about how I'd poisoned the kids' feelings toward her. I wasn't proud of what they said to her when she joined them in the backyard. Kids can be cruel, but Jacqueline stuck to her word. After about 6 months, things were as good as they could get in a divorce situation. It was hard for everyone, but Jacqueline had changed too. She'd started teaching kindergarten, was totally devoted to her kids, and had adhered to all my rules, including never saying another word to me. She even seemed content with her modest salary. The really funny thing was that anyone who knew Jacqueline could see that she was in love with me. Jacqueline is one of those women whose love needs a strong man. It's just too bad she didn't realize she'd married one. Me? For some reason, I've continued to mellow. A shark can be very persuasive, especially when they give you that special smile. Husbands, you know the one. Martha and I are now expecting our second child. I've learned what a true partnership can be when both people are equal. Most of all, I've learned how a strong woman's love can make a man a better person. Happy feels so inadequate to describe what we have. As time passed, I found myself not only adapting to my new life, but truly thriving in it. The struggles, the pain, the battles, they all started to fade into the past, replaced by the warmth of a life I never thought possible. I had built something real, something solid. Martha and I, we were a team. We worked together, raised our children together, and most importantly, loved each other deeply. I realized that the person I had been before, the man hardened by anger, betrayal, and frustration, was no longer who I was. Martha had shown me a different way, a way to be vulnerable, to be open, to love without hesitation. We had our fair share of challenges, but nothing felt insurmountable when we faced it together. The kids were thriving too. They had blossomed in the loving environment we created, and even Jacqueline, in her own way, had found a sense of peace. I couldn't help but feel a little proud of myself for having kept my word and not letting the bitterness consume me. The bond one had with the kids was stronger than ever, and I could see the healing that was taking place, not just in their lives, but in mine as well. And then, there were the small moments, the laughter at the dinner table, the late-night talks with Martha about our dreams and our future, the quiet mornings with the kids, watching them grow. These moments were the ones that made everything worth it. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. As for me, I had become the man I never knew I could be. Not just a father, not just a partner, but someone who had learned the true meaning of love and redemption. I had no more regrets, no more doubts. I had found my peace, and with Martha by my side, I knew I could face whatever came next with strength, love, and a sense of contentment I had never known before. In the end, I had discovered that happiness wasn't about escaping the past. It was about learning from it, growing from it, and embracing the future. And as I watched Martha smile at me across the room, I realized that the best part of all was the journey we had ahead. Together. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
I can't control my emotions, I exclaimed as steam billowed from my ears. Across the bar, my friend Shelley flashed a simple grin, casually wiping down glasses and tending to the bar with the skill of a seasoned bartender. This was Shelley's bar, named after her late husband, a clever nod to his legacy of helping patrons claim they frequented Jim's. It was a cozy spot, a joint Shelley and Jim had fought tooth and nail to keep afloat. Jim's relentless toil eventually led him to an early grave, leaving Shelley to use his life insurance to settle debts and honor his memory by keeping the bar alive. "All right, Barb," Shelley chimed, topping off my wine glass. "Let me get this straight. You're not upset that Dean, your husband, cheated? It's about who he cheated with?" I took a sip, contemplating her question. "Blaming me, Shelley? Have you seen her?" The woman in question, Marge, was a sight, overweight, chain-smoking, and vocally brash. She held down a middle management job in some bureaucratic abyss, churning out documents for yet another pointless government agency. Shelley set a few more glasses on the bar counter. "Barb, you realize that Marge and Dean's fling happened before you even met Dean, right?" Glancing around the nearly empty bar, save for a couple of guys shooting pool in the back, I shook my head. "Who cares, Shelley? I'm dead serious. Look at me." Rising from the bar stool, I spun around, showcasing my yoga-toned physique before settling back down. "And compare this body to, well, hers," I grimaced, conjuring an image of Marge in my mind. "It's just not right." Shelley draped the towel over her shoulder. "Your husband Dean made a commitment by marrying you. I don't get why this is bothering you. What if he wasn't the one who ended it?" Learning that Marge and Dean had been an item for over a year, I grimaced. "What if Marge dumped Dean? That means I signed up for a guy who wasn't even good enough for Marge." "It's sickening, Barb. Again, what a contrast. What one person discards, another cherishes. Marge's loss is your gain." "Easy for you to talk, Shelley. You're not the one having to sleep with a guy who's been messing around with Marge for over a year." Shelley leaned casually against the counter, a smirk playing on her lips. "Maybe Marge had some bedroom skills that kept Dean interested. Perhaps you two should swap recipes." I nearly choked on my wine. "Just so you know, anyone who's been in my kitchen leaves completely satisfied and always craving more." Shelley arched an eyebrow in response. Glancing around discreetly, I continued, "I may not be a saint, but I'm far from being some sleazy streetwalker." Shelley chuckled, giving my shoulder a comforting pat. "Physical engaging is only scandalous when done right." I could feel my face flushing as I replied, "Shelley, please, this is serious. I'm not okay with this." Shelley shook her head. "Physical engaging takes the least time but causes the most problems." Ignoring her remark, I traced my finger along the rim of my glass. "It's just hard to envision a future with Dean when his past with that Marge woman keeps haunting him." Shelley shook her head, fixing her gaze on me. "Barb, have you ever heard the saying, 'The past is behind you, learn from it. The future is ahead, prepare for it'?" Then a somber expression clouded her face. "Don't you adore Tom the cat? I adore that massive black feline. He's the largest cat I've ever laid eyes on, like a pint-sized panther." "Great," I retorted. "Dean and Tom have always been a pair. Maybe Tom can show Dean how to land a proper job. In the 5 years we've been married, Dean hasn't held down steady employment. He's never put his business education to use." Shelley regarded me with a puzzled expression. "You can't be serious. People from abroad ship their antique wooden pieces here for restoration." "Yeah, I get it, but it's uncomfortable at our office gatherings when Dean mentions he's into woodworking. I dislike the idea that he comes off as some rustic lumberjack. He could have climbed halfway up the corporate ladder by now if he wanted. Instead, Dean prefers tinkering in the garage." "Barb, I've seen Dean's garage. It's more like a professional workshop, better equipped than many woodworking shops." "That's my garage," I snapped. "Part of my grandfather's home, which he left me after my parents passed away." "But didn't Dean completely renovate all the wooden floors in the house?" "Yes, but... and all the moldings and doorways, too." "Yes, but what about the front porch steps and trim?" "Sure, but let's not forget about the fireplace," Shelley remarked, reaching under the counter and producing a magazine. She slid a glossy 2-page spread in front of me. "Barb, isn't that you? On the elegant staircase Dean crafted from scratch, featured in National Home magazine." All right, Shelley, but I was the one dealing with all that dust, and now your house is on the county's historic register. If Dean had taken any of those job offers he had after school, we could have made a decent amount of money and hired someone else to do that kind of work. You don't know what it's like to rely solely on one income, mine. It's not a situation that leaves me thrilled." Shelley rolled her eyes. "I believe it was Groucho Marx who once said, 'What good is happiness if it can't be bought with money?'" I took another sip of my wine. "Seriously, Shelley, Dean getting turned down by Marge and his meager income aren't exactly the keys to my happiness." "What's the key? Do you really think having enough money unlocks happiness?" Shelley shook her head. "Seriously, Barb, my goodness, were you and your siblings blessed with intelligence? Do you understand how antique restoration generates income? Are you making payments on that new Lexus you got last year?" "Well, no," I stuttered. "Dean paid for the car in full right after I picked it out." Shelley set the magazine aside. "Having a lot of money doesn't make you special. More often than not, it just means you're fortunate." Swirling the wine in my glass, I couldn't help but remark, "It's easy for you to say. The last time I saw Dean in a suit was at my mom's funeral. The guy practically lives in faded jeans." Shelley stretched, placing the glasses on the top shelf. "It was folks in jeans who built this country. It's the fools in suits who are tearing it down." Just then, Dean slid into the seat next to me. "So, what are my two lovely ladies discussing?" Shelley turned to Dean. "Tell me, son, how much did your little lumber business bring in last year?" A look of surprise flashed across Dean's face. "You mean the income statement?" He chuckled. "A gentleman never discusses money or his women." Shelley shifted her attention from me to Dean. "We were just discussing your wife's new Lexus. What about you? Have you replaced your old pickup truck yet?" Dean glanced at Shelley, surprised. "Why, it might be 15 years old, but aside from some rust, it runs perfectly fine." Trying to divert the conversation, I interjected, "Speaking of people you know, Marge is now leading the homeowners association next door." "That's nice," Dean replied, absent-mindedly picking up the menu. "Shelley, is my order ready?" Just then, one of the pool players signaled for another beer, holding up an empty bottle and gesturing 5 fingers. Shelley stepped away to attend to the order, leaving Dean and me alone. "Dean, did you catch what I mentioned?" Dean turned the page of the menu. "Of course, Barb. You mentioned that Marge is now heading the homeowners association. It shouldn't bother us. The house is in great shape. You're not concerned." Dean set the menu aside and glanced at me with a puzzled expression. "Huh? I don't care if the house is in great shape." "You idiot," I exclaimed, pushing the menu away. "I'm talking about Marge." Dean looked genuinely embarrassed. "So what about Marge?" "God, you men can be so dense," I sighed. "You and her. Me and her what? Dean inquired. You two have met before? I used my fingers to gesture quotation marks around the word met. Dean shook his head. Yeah, Marge and I dated before I met you. So what? Before me, you were dating the quarterback, Mr. All-American High School. That reminds me. Could you call him tomorrow and check on our car insurance? I want to extend the coverage on your Lexus. There's a difference, Dean. The Mr. All-American High School, as you called him, now sells us insurance, is married, has 2 children, and a picket fence that you helped him install, I explained. A smile spread across Dean's face. Ah, I see. You want 2 children. That's great, Barb. You know I've been eager for us to start a family. Don't worry about your job. I've got orders lined up for the next 2 years. You can always return to work after, Barb. Dean's voice trailed off as I stormed off my bar stool and out of the bar. The house felt chilly over the next few days. Perplexed, Dean gave me space, burying himself in his workshop with yet another of his projects. Shelley said I was overreacting, even suggesting that too many women seek the right person instead of striving to be the right one. But I couldn't shake my feelings. I mean, who wants someone else's leftovers? That's why I found myself at Marge's house, hoping to uncover the truth. Sure you don't want a beer? Marge asked, settling into a chair in her pantsuit, cigarette in one hand and a store-brand beer in the other. No thanks, Marge, I replied, perching on the edge of her couch, careful not to touch anything. Surveying Marge's home, I couldn't believe she had any say in matters of taste. Her decor resembled a 60s trailer park, with lion and leopard prints adorning every surface. Suit yourself, Marge shrugged, popping open the beer she held in her hand. Her little dog leaped into her lap and she affectionately petted it, making kissing noises. Let me tell you, Barb, if there aren't any dogs in heaven, then when I kick the bucket, I want to head wherever they are. Marge continued conversing with the dog before turning to me. Lots of folks talk to animals, but not many bother to listen to them. That's the issue. I struggled to keep my stomach settled, the smoke stinging my eyes. Marge, I'm surprised you're still smoking. You know you work for the government with all its anti-tobacco regulations. Marge exhaled a plume of smoke. It's been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that smoking tops the charts in terms of statistics. Attempting to join in with a light chuckle, I shifted the conversation to general homeowner inquiries, aiming to uncover the real motive behind my visit. However, Marge struck me to the punch later in our discussion. Does Dean still have that big old black cat, Tom? I winced before replying. Yes, Marge. Tom the cat still belongs to Dean. Marge took a sip of her beer. Darn it, that cat never belonged to anyone. Tom came and went as he pleased. She took another sip from the can. Dean mentioned we used to bump into each other back when that other guy was president. I don't think you were around then. Yeah, Dean mentioned you two used to be an item, Marge exclaimed, slapping her thigh. Have you guys crossed paths? Damn, we were like rabbits in bed for over a year. I couldn't get enough of him. I tried not to reveal my surprise. So, you and Dean have split up? What happened? Marge shrugged before taking another sip. He just wasn't my type. Sure, he's a nice guy. Handsome, a bit on the skinny side for my taste, but funny, great in bed and all that. Dean's just not my cup of tea. I attempted to keep my composure, though internally I was seething. Got it. Not your type. I composed myself before asking in a non-confrontational tone, Is it true? Did Dean do something to cause the breakup? Marge shrugged once more before replying. No, nothing like that. I'm sure he's a great match for someone like you, but Dean wasn't the man I was looking for. I laughed nervously, though inside I wanted to explode. Wow, Marge, sounds like you're searching for Superman. Grinning as she sipped her beer, Marge chuckled. Well, it's nice to have a superhero around, if you catch my drift. She crushed the beer can before tossing it into the nearby trash. As much as I'd love to keep swapping stories about our exes, I've got to get back to business now. Barb, any homeowner questions for me? I swallowed back the bitterness, wondering if Marge could sense the steam rising from my ears as I retrieved the folder from my purse. Meeting Marge only worsened my already foul mood. Dean pondered, realizing I didn't want to talk. He gave me space, diving into his workshop and volunteering as a youth soccer coach. With Dean away on a 2-day trip, I found myself at Jim's bar, seated beside Shelley as she polished glasses. The bar was moderately busy for a weeknight, with a particularly boisterous group of suits at one table. Where's your acrobat? Shelley inquired, pouring me a glass of white wine. I took a sip before responding. Dean took his truck to fetch some old wooden relic that some wealthy fool wants to restore. If they have so much money, why not buy new things? What's the appeal of paying 10 times more for some old junk when you could have something good and new? Shelley shook her head. Are you talking about Dean or his latest project? Both, neither, I don't know. It's all just so disheartening, I lamented. Shelley tossed her towel over her shoulder. Care for some cheese with that wine? She rolled her eyes. Life isn't solely about your destination. It's about the journey and the experiences. Dean's a great guy, so quit complaining. I stared at my glass. Shelley, I've got problems. Shelley reached across the counter, giving me a mock peck on the cheek. Quit whining. You're fixating on first world issues, like misplacing your TV remote, your Starbucks coffee being too cold, or an email attachment taking too long to load. Problems that impoverished people elsewhere would love to have instead of, say, struggling to access clean water or medicine for their sick child in a distant, unaffordable hospital. I recoiled. Just because my issues aren't as grave as others doesn't mean I'm problem-free. Yes, that's true, Shelley replied, her voice tinged with frustration. You hit the jackpot, Barb. Good job. Great health, loving husband. Need I say more? I'd give up everything I own just to spend 20 minutes with my late husband. You were born with a silver spoon. Stop thinking you're unhappy. Shelley's outburst stunned me, but she continued. Listen, Barb, you can't be the bride at every wedding, the corpse at every funeral, and the baby at every baptism. Feeling insulted, I was about to retort when the bar doors swung open and a group of sweaty men in baseball uniforms flooded in. Shelley's mood instantly lifted. It's going to be a lively night. It's the Gay Men's Softball League. I grimaced. You let guys like that in here? She gave me a pointed look. Seriously, Barb, if by guys like that, you mean men with disposable income who spend generously on drinks and cause no trouble, then yes, not only do I welcome these guys, I actively seek them out and welcome them. This is a bar, after all. Before I could respond, a towering black man approached the counter. He was the largest person I'd ever seen, standing over 6 feet 10 inches tall and weighing around 250 pounds. The buttons on his broad chest strained against his uniform, emblazoned with the team name Master Batters. Shelley must have been acquainted with this towering man, as she didn't protest when he reached over the counter and effortlessly lifted her up, much like a child lifting a Barbie doll. Set me down, Leroy, Shelley squealed as the giant gently placed her back on the ground. No problem, Shelley, Leroy responded in his deep baritone. Thought you might want to meet the MVP of the Northeast League Southern Division Western Champions. Shelley shyly batted her eyelashes. Does your husband know you're flirting with the opposing team? Leroy burst into laughter. I wasn't always gay, just got sucked into it. It seemed to be an old joke, as Shelley merely rolled her eyes. Sorry, Leroy, you know I don't mess with any man under 9 inches. Leroy pondered for a moment. Damn, Shelley, I'm not chopping off 3 inches. I was taken aback by their banter, but Shelley seemed unfazed, even when Leroy ordered, That'll do, sweetheart. Bring 6 jugs of your finest draft ale for my fellow Batman warriors. He paused. And some Pepsi, too. Shelley began arranging the jugs on the counter. Who's the teetotaler and why's he in my bar? Leroy looked puzzled. That'd be me, starting a 3-day shift at the fire station tonight. Shelley turned to me, filling the jugs with beer. Barb, my only waitress is out sick, and I'm short-handed tonight. She gestured to a group of suited men at a corner table. Can you handle them? We've helped each other out in the past. Shelley and I used to waitress together during school, so it's no big deal, I assured her. A rowdy group congregated at the table adorned with costumes. Ties were loosened and jackets draped over chairbacks. A burly man, reminiscent of a former athlete, appeared to be the ringleader. Hey guys, I greeted them with a smile. What can I get for you? I endured the usual barrage of comments about my phone number or physical attributes, a routine every waitress dealing with intoxicated men has faced since taverns started serving drinks. Over time, I'd become immune to such remarks from fraternity types, mentally filtering them out to the point where they barely registered. One of the men in suits stood up, towering over 6 feet tall. Must have been my lucky day, he quipped, gesturing to the table. Sorry about the commotion. My buddies are celebrating my recent promotion. He handed me a business card, confirming my suspicions. Below the name in bold gold font read the title, Senior Vice President, Interdepartmental Technology, Southern Hemisphere. Impressive, I remarked, attempting to return the card. He waved it off. Keep it. I'm feeling generous. So, let's have another round, but only if you join us for a drink. I hesitated, but the table erupted into chants of drink, have a drink, escalating until I relented just to appease them. Meanwhile, Shelley was busy filling beer jugs while I tended to the drinks for my table. She noticed the business card I'd left on the bar. "Whose is this?" Shelley inquired, nodding toward the shiny new card. I gestured toward the corner table. "The gentleman at that table, the tall one. Looks like he's the new bigwig, and it seems he's got some cash to spare." Shelley wiped the foam off the card's edge. "Remember what Grandma used to say about money not buying happiness?" I rolled my eyes. "They say money can't buy happiness, but I'd sure love to cry in my new Ferrari." Chuckling, Shelley examined the card and burst into laughter. "What's so funny?" I inquired. She shook her head, reading aloud. "Vice President of Interdepartmental Technology for the Southern Hemisphere. Don't you see? Look at the initials. Shh, IT head. Your CEO's a idiot." Snatching the card, I scrutinized it again. After a moment, I shrugged. "So what if it's not the classiest title? He still seems like a big shot." Shelley remained unimpressed. "Big shots are just small fry to other big shots. Mind your manners." I chuckled it off, but Shelley placed her hand on my shoulder. "Don't play the fool, and don't do anything stupid to retaliate against an idiot." Shaking off her grip, I retorted, "I won't. It's just a little jab back at Dean from Marge. I'll just have a few drinks with them to keep things in check. Free drinks are free drinks. You know the saying, all the best things in life are free." Shelley wasn't ready to let it go. "The best things in life may be free, but they come at a hefty cost." In my defense, I was so intoxicated that I hardly remember what transpired next. I can't recall leaving the bar, reaching my house, or climbing the stairs to my bedroom. There are faint recollections of being carnal with the idiot in my bed, followed by a feeble climax. I think I momentarily sobered up during the second or third round when he accidentally caused me pain. "No!" I yelled, evading him and nearly tumbling off the bed, barely discernible in the darkness. He nudged me with his paw. "You're not leaving me hanging, are you? I've still got one more round in the chamber." My head throbbed now as the inevitable hangover kicked in, and I started feeling remorseful about my actions. Placing my hand on his chest, I said, "Listen, I think it's best if you go. I can't have you staying the night. How about whipping up some breakfast?" I really didn't need that right now. My headache was worsening. "Real funny, but seriously, I need you to leave." I gestured toward the bathroom door as he got out of bed. As he made his way to the bathroom, I glanced at the clock on the dresser. Its red LEDs displaying 3:18 a.m., the sound of running water ceased, and the strip of light under the bathroom door vanished. Amidst a creeping hangover and burgeoning guilt, reality began to sink in. Just as the bathroom door swung open, revealing the undressed silhouette of the idiot, the bedroom door creaked open simultaneously, revealing the outline of a figure holding something in their hands as they stealthily crossed the threshold. I shrieked, causing the intruder to halt in his tracks. Creep burst out of the bathroom doorway, snatched a table lamp from the dresser, and struck the intruder on the back of the head. The unexpected blow sent the uninvited guest crashing to the floor. My screams ceased as I switched on the bedside lamp. Hastily dialing emergency on my desk phone, I pleaded, "Send the police! There's a burglar in my house!" as the emergency operator began her scripted response. I glanced at Creep, who was using a lamp cord to bind the intruder's hands behind his back, and a chill ran down my spine. Roses, dropped by the intruder, littered the floor. Beside his hands lay a pair of work boots, presumably carried when he was struck. They were Dean's worn-out work boots. Creep finished securing the knots, muttering, "You damn burglar, think you can sneak up on me?" As Blockhead grabbed the intruder by the hair, lifting his head from the floor, my blood turned to ice as Dean's bloodied face came into view. A soft groan escaped his lips. I leaped off the bed, approaching my husband. "Get away from him, it's my husband." Blockhead wore a puzzled expression as he released Dean's hair, causing his face to thud against the floor. "Your husband? What the hell?" He didn't finish his sentence as a low growl emanated from the darkness beyond the bedroom door. For a moment, two yellow eyes glared at us before a swift black blur emerged from the darkness, latching onto Creep's face. Blockhead's screams mingled with a fierce growl as Tom the cat sank his claws and teeth into his head. They spun around as Blockhead leaped up, attempting to pry Tom off, colliding with the window. Eventually, he managed to wrench the big black cat away from his scratched and bleeding face. Dodging a furious kick, Tom darted under the bed to safety. Grasping his injured face and swearing, Blockhead cursed as I dropped to my knees, reaching for Dean's head. Suddenly, excruciating pain shot through my left bum part, as if dozens of knives had pierced me. Letting out a scream, I frantically tried to rid myself of the source of agony. Tom refused to release his grip, causing me to whirl around in pain, screaming the entire time. After what felt like an eternity, I stumbled upon Blockhead still nursing his bleeding face and cursing at the cat. Finally freeing myself from Tom's grasp, he retreated back under the bed, paying no heed to the blood running down my leg. I hopped around, attempting to return to Dean, but inadvertently stepped on Creep's foot. "You stupid idiot!" he roared, withdrawing his hand from his face to deliver a powerful blow to my head, sending me crashing onto the bed. "I'm going to strike you up," he bellowed. Still reeling from the ringing in my ears, I watched as Creep, his hand poised, advanced from the window toward me while I lay disoriented on the bed. However, before he could take another step, I witnessed Dean spring to his feet, his hand still bound behind his back. With a sudden burst of energy, Dean lunged forward, executing a gravity-defying somersault without using his arms. At the pinnacle of his mid-air spin, Dean seemed to rotate around both legs, striking Creep in the chest and forcefully slamming him back into the wall, where he became ensnared in the window curtains. As soon as Dean fell on the ground, he sprang to his feet and dashed toward Creep, who was still ensnared in the curtains. With a powerful shoulder thrust, Dean propelled him backward into the wall, then turned to shout at me, "Run, Barb, run! Get out of here! Call for help! I'll handle this attacker!" I stood frozen in place, gazing at Dean's bloodied face, his hair drenched in blood, as he struggled to restrain Creep with his smaller frame. The curtains tore from the wall as Creep raised his massive forearm and struck Dean's face with a sickening crack. Dean crumpled to the ground. The assailant kicked Dean, who groaned and rolled away from the blow. Advancing toward Dean, Creep raised his foot high to stomp on him as he lay motionless on the floor. However, just as Block's leg began its descent, a black blur darted out from under the bed, and with a piercing growl, Tom the cat seized the assailant's groin. Blockhead's shriek reached such a high pitch that it resembled a woman's cry. The screams persisted as Blockhead leaned over, pounding Tom the cat in an attempt to dislodge the angry feline from his groin. Suddenly, Dean shook his head and surged up from the floor, thrusting his shoulder into the bent assailant's stomach. With a roar, Dean hoisted Blockhead onto his back in a fireman's carry, his legs flailing. At full speed, Dean propelled the three of them toward the large picture window of the bedroom. The cacophony of Dean's roar, Blockhead's screams, and Tom's furious hissing was drowned out by the shattering of glass. I remained frozen on the bed, horror-stricken, as the trio vanished from view, plummeting outside the window into the dark night. Their sounds were abruptly muffled, then ceased altogether. For a moment, the room fell into silence, broken only by the flap of a curtain in the wind from the shattered window. Then came the soft patter of broken glass fragments falling. Suddenly, a piercing, heart-wrenching scream filled the room. It took my brain a few moments to register that I was the one screaming at the top of my lungs. My mind felt shrouded in a fog, but gradually the haze lifted, as if I were resurfacing from underwater. Opening my eyes, I found myself face to face with an Asian woman in a blue hospital gown, gently dabbing my face with a cool towel. Our eyes met, and she set down the towel before hurrying off, murmuring, "I'll go fetch the doctor." As I turned my head, I spotted Shelley seated in a chair beside my bed. Yet my attempt to sit up was thwarted by the restraints securing my wrists and legs to the bed. "Damn it," I yelled at Shelley. "Get that nurse, Chinese, Vietnamese, whatever, and release me." Coming closer, Shelley tried to calm me down. "Take it easy, Barb. You were unconscious all day. They had to restrain you because you were being combative. The nurse, whom I believe is Vietnamese, went to fetch the doctor." Still struggling, I insisted. "Chinese, Vietnamese, it doesn't matter. Just set me free now. I need to see Dean." "Calm down, Barb. You're fortunate I'm here. Leroy, the African-American fellow from the Gay Softball League, was among the first responders on the night of your incident. He remembered you were my friend and let me know you were here and what had happened," Shelley said, her eyes misty as she recounted the events. My body sagged with shame at the memory of that night, knowing Shelley was aware of what transpired. She continued, "They had to administer a sedative to you. The whole situation was unpleasant. But don't worry, Leroy got some of his firefighter buddies to use ladders to fix the broken window on the top floor of your house. Although I've been discharged, I had to sign numerous documents stating that I was acting against medical advice. I'll need to schedule a follow-up appointment to formally discharge from the hospital. Blah, blah, blah. I would have signed a confession to the Kennedy assassination if it meant I could see Dean. However, when I glimpsed Dean through the NICU window, it was a shock. He was swathed in bandages, surrounded by tubes, bags, and machines. I was rendered speechless as I struggled to comprehend the medical jargon the doctor used to describe Dean's condition. I interrupted the doctor's detailed medical explanation. "Will Dean pull through?" The doctor paused, and I gripped Shelley's hand tightly. After a moment, he responded, "I believe he'll survive, but it'll be a challenging journey ahead. He'll need multiple rounds of reconstructive surgery and an extended recovery period. Unfortunately, some of the most effective treatments aren't covered by insurance. The procedures necessary for his optimal recovery will be quite costly." In that moment, I realized my deep love for Dean had always been there, just waiting for a tragedy to reveal it. Determined to demonstrate my love, I took action immediately. I emptied my retirement savings to finance his treatment. Early withdrawal penalties and tax consequences were insignificant compared to the need. I secured a substantial loan against my home, increased my credit card limits, and even traded in my Lexus for cash and an old van, believing it would facilitate Dean's transportation after treatment. The longing for Dean was profound. They say you only miss the sun when it starts to snow and the light when the candle burns out. As the weeks passed, life felt like living in a perpetual hell. Dean's mental recovery lagged behind his physical healing. The neurosurgeon informed me that his memory would gradually return in fragments, but the timeline and extent were uncertain. I dreaded the possibility that he might recall the events of that fateful night. I dedicated hours to Dean, reminiscing over old photos, sharing anecdotes, and tirelessly searching for Tom the cat, who vanished that dreadful night. Despite distributing flyers, placing ads, and visiting shelters, the elusive feline remained elusive. Months passed uneventfully until the sight of 2 law enforcement officers exiting the rehabilitation facility sent a chill down my spine. Until then, I had successfully thwarted persistent detectives, using a fortress of medical directives and legal documents to shield Dean. However, my world crumbled when I encountered resistance at the rehab center's front desk. The once friendly guards now wore stern expressions as they barred my passage to Dean's room. "Ma'am, we must insist you vacate the premises immediately," one guard stated firmly. "And we're advising against your return until further notice," the other added. They ushered me out, pushing me toward the parking lot and my car. The following day, a police cruiser delivered a restraining order, prohibiting any contact with Dean and mandating a distance of over 100 yards. Upon seeing Dean, I barely recognized him. Doubt clouded my mind. Perhaps I had erred in the date or location. Over a year had passed since our last encounter, and my life spiraled downward in every aspect. Despite my persistent attempts to reach out, Dean had rebuffed all communication. Yet determined to make our reunion inevitable, I followed the unfamiliar path to the rear of the grand estate. Passing furniture Dean had once restored, I stepped onto the porch to find a stranger before me, bald, with a vicious scar encircling a portion of his head. His once radiant blue eyes, which always brightened at the sight of me, now resembled hard stones, barely flickering with recognition. With a dark mustache and goatee, Dean resembled Walter White from Breaking Bad more than my husband. The sole identifier was the large black cat nestled in his lap, which Dean stroked. The sight of the bald man with the feline resembled a scene from a cheesy sci-fi film, with an ominous villain poised to destroy the world. Taking a shallow breath, I approached them with outstretched arms, hoping for a fresh start with a hug. However, Tom the cat leaped onto Dean's lap, his back arched, fur standing on end, tail raised, emitting a hissing growl with bared fangs. Dean extended his hand, palm facing me, and uttered harsh words. "Stop it, Barb. There's only one kitty here I'm interested in, and it's not you." I stood frozen. The words delivered in Dean's body lacked the smoothness of his usual voice, instead bearing a hoarse, guttural tone reminiscent of Marlon Brando in The Godfather. Collecting myself, I took a seat across from Dean, separated by a small table cluttered with scattered folders and Tom still growling. "Quiet, Tom," I muttered, meeting Dean's gaze. "Where did you find Tom? I searched everywhere for him." "I haven't seen Tom since." Dean maintained his stern gaze, leaving an uncomfortable silence hanging between us. Finally, he broke it. "Well, Barb, Margie brought Tom to me. She found him injured and rushed him to the veterinary clinic. Seems like Tom had quite the pricey hospital stay, too," I muttered under my breath. That woman, before forcing a smile. "I mean, that was kind of Marge. We'll have to find a way to repay her." Dean continued to pet Tom. "Yes, Barb? You want to talk, right?" I fought back tears. "Dean, I know I've made mistakes. He cut me off. Mistakes make good stories, but lousy marriages. I pushed on. I started to see things differently. I thought I was better than I really was, smarter and more deserving. Now I know better. I awaited Dean's response. Each second dragged on like an eternity before he spoke. Beware of false knowledge. It's more dangerous than ignorance. Why are you here? I'm here, Dean, to apologize sincerely, to show you I understand how you feel. He let out a bitter laugh. Do you? I'd walk with a limp, have constant headaches, and my balance would never be the same. Find someone twice your size to smash your head with a lamp, break most of your body, and then fall 30 feet. Then maybe we'll talk. Wait, don't forget to add being stabbed in the back and betrayed by someone you trusted more than life itself. Realizing you never loved me was worse than rehab, Dean added, grinning. Dean, that's not true, I countered. He chuckled. The truth sets you free, but not before it breaks you. Unsure of how to respond, I stammered, I don't know what to say. Dean, I began, but he leaned back as Tom the cat leapt off his lap. Come on, Barb. Speaking the truth is easy. It's weaving a web of lies that's hard. Or are you using Homer Simpson's logic on me? It takes two to lie, one to lie, and one to listen. My anger started to rise. I'm not some fool, and I see the light at the end of the tunnel, he smirked. We all know light travels faster than sound. That's why some people seem bright until they speak. You seem to fit that category just fine. Trying to stay calm, I said, Did you really have to target Shelley after you filed complaints with the state council? They revoked her liquor license. She lost the bar. Dean intertwined his fingers. Yes, it seems the Drinks Commission takes its rules seriously. They don't allow bar owners to have non-employees serve drinks. Shelley sent you to that table where you got drunk. I see no reason why Shelley shouldn't face the consequences. It wasn't her fault, Dean. The bar was busy that night. Shelley was too overwhelmed to monitor my actions. He glared at me. Shelley wasn't the only one busy that night, were you, Barb? I was nearly in tears. Shelley was my oldest friend. Now she won't even speak to me. And she was also your friend. I dried my tears. Your injury, it changed you, and it's my fault. You've always been such a decent guy, Dean. Why did you feel the need to burn, Shelley? Dean leaned in. Burn, Shelley. Right now I guess I'm just ashes because you know what they say about where nice guys finish. Good guys finish last. Don't mistake kindness for weakness again. He leaned back. So, Barb, if you can't hang with the cool crowd, step off your broomstick. It was a nightmare. You couldn't just take it out on me, could you, Dean? Hasn't there been enough pain and suffering? The DA didn't file charges, calling it a group riot. He gestured to a folder with the state seal. Lies written in ink can't conceal facts written in blood. Blood? Is that what you want, Dean? My blood. We lost Creep's lawsuit because your testimony supported his case. Dean stared. I think that guy who'll never walk again and will live with a colostomy bag deserves better than memories of you. Barb, Dean said, looking at me. Some people are only alive because it's illegal to shoot them. I brushed it off. I'm losing my house. They're garnishing my wages. Our accounts are frozen. We're broke. Dean seemed unsurprised. Yeah, you're broke. It was a statement. He motioned around. I'm just a poor planner trading my work for basic needs. This meeting wasn't going as I hoped. I sighed. I can say sorry a million times, but it seems you're not ready to hear it. Let's just keep talking and deal with things as they come. Dean reached for a document from the pile on the table and tossed it over to me. These are divorce papers. Sometimes you have to cut ties to prevent the crazies from trailing you. Over the next 16 months, my life felt like a never-ending cycle. Job loss due to performance woes consumed me, with drinking becoming my main pastime, leaving little room for work. Going to work felt futile as most of my paycheck went to Blockhead, who spent endless hours fending off creditors until payday. Amidst the chaos, there were glimmers of hope, like job insurance covering treatment for an STD contracted during one of my drunken blackouts. Today marked the lowest point. Outside my former home, I waited for the bank representative to finalize foreclosure, promised $500 for house upkeep, along with whatever remained from selling or pawning belongings from my worn-out minivan, would have to suffice. With 4 nearly bald tires, I set off to my new job, where my elderly aunt ran a tavern near mining towns up north. It wasn't a dream job, but it offered affordable housing amidst the hillbillies in the village. In the depths of my despair, guess who approaches? The woman who triggered this whole debacle, Marge. She strolls with her dog nipping at her ankle, cigarette dangling from her lips. I secretly hoped she'd veer across the street, but no such luck as she strides right up to me. Heading for bail? Marge queries, exhaling smoke. Yeah, Marge, going to help an aunt up north. You know the saying, when one door closes, another opens. Barb, when that door closes, grab a hammer and nails. Seal it shut, Marge advises sternly. I apologize, I reply, observing her dog relieve itself on my minivan tire. Marge takes another drag. You're like some twisted Rapunzel turning gold into straw. You're the only one who's turned Dean, one of the nicest guys around, into a complete idiot. I beg to differ, Marge, I countered. Why does it matter to you? You let him go. How does this concern you? Marge lit another cigarette from the behind of the one she was smoking. You must be the most clueless woman alive. I released Dean because he was too decent to leave me himself. I knew he deserved better. We only connected through a drunken encounter. I'm not as naive as you. I understood Dean was sticking around to spare me from looking like a total floozy. I wasn't inclined to argue with Marge. Look, if I could turn back time and change things, I would. Marge leaned over to stroke her dog. No, you'd probably get injured from time travel, like through sheer idiocy. I gestured to the crucifix hanging from Marge's neck. I thought you were a Christian. What happened to loving your neighbor? Jesus may love you, but that doesn't change the fact that you're promiscuous, she retorted. I waved as Marge and her dog departed. Well, thank goodness this is the last encounter. Marge didn't look back, but I heard her retort. Don't assume you've seen the last of something or someone. With a pounding headache and a craving for a drink, relief washed over me when a BMW finally pulled up, and a well-dressed woman in her 30s hopped out. Her demeanor seemed to declare, I'm in real estate because my husband rakes in cash and I'm bored while the nanny watches the kids. Look at you. You must be Barb. Apologies for my tardiness. It's been a chaotic day. This marks my third citation today with 2 more to follow, she chirped, which grated on my nerves. Oh, the struggles you endure. I suppose you long for the days when bank robberies involved people robbing banks rather than banks seizing homes, I retorted. The bank representative appeared puzzled as she extracted a piece of paper and an envelope from her designer bag. Here's your money, just as we agreed. Hopefully, it brings a smile to your face. Indeed, trading my great-grandparents' home, a family heirloom for generations, for less than a month's salary, fills me with an urge to dance and sing, I replied, dripping with sarcasm. She attempted to soothe my agitation. Don't worry, the house will be well cared for. A group of affluent gentlemen established a trust and purchased it. They've pledged to maintain its original state. Once their caretaker arrives, we'll provide a tour for your confirmation, and then you'll be on your way. Suddenly, a loud crash signaled the arrival of a large motorcycle pulling up behind the BMW. The rider embodied the stereotypical biker image, adorned with tattoos, clad in a leather vest, gloves, and sunglasses. Instead of a helmet, he sported a Harley-Davidson scarf wrapped around his head. As he dismounted, it became apparent that he was short, yet extraordinarily muscular, resembling a sturdy fire hydrant. My spirits sank as the biker directed his attention to the box on the back of his bike. Emerging from it, the big black cat leaped out and stretched on the sidewalk, confirming the biker's identity as Dean. With a noticeable limp, he approached us, pausing to lift his sunglasses, a cigar held between his lips. Dean strode up to the girl, completely disregarding my presence. Let's settle this. You know who. She waved her hand dramatically, dispersing Dean's cigar smoke. I'd prefer if you refrain from smoking in my presence. Dean paused to take the cigar from his mouth, but didn't extinguish it as he spoke to her. Listen up, I'm not here for your thanks. She appeared bewildered. It seemed she wasn't accustomed to such talk at her exclusive club. Attempting a different approach, she gestured at Dean's cigar. Do you realize how injurious that is to your health? Dean glanced at his cigar. My grandpa lived to be 95 smoking cigars, she quizzed with a mocking grin. Really? Dean retorted, replacing the cigar in his mouth. He lived to be 95 by minding his own business. The girl clung tightly to her designer handbag as Dean edged closer to her. Before uttering a word, he gestured toward the house. You're here for your commission? Then, he motioned toward me. Sure, there's a fleet coming into port somewhere and this cheating woman needs to service a bunch of sailors and you can join her for all I care. But first, before you send her packing, take the keys from her. At last, I interjected. Dean, I'd appreciate it if you didn't insult me. Dean's stern gaze shifted to me. Oh, did I hurt your feelings by calling you a stupid woman? My bad, I thought you were already aware. The girl seemed to realize our connection and attempted to diffuse the tension with a forced laugh. Well, everything happens for a reason. Dean maintained his gaze on me as he spoke. Barb, your reason is that you're foolish and make foolish choices. But look at it this way. Jellyfish don't have brains and they've been around for 150 million years, so there's hope. I wished I could disappear. Let's just finish this so I can collect my money and leave. Then you can find happiness. Dean gestured with his cigar toward me. Yes, your presence fills me with delight, so much so that I'd rather restrain myself from clapping my hands in joy. He addressed the bank representative. Hand that envelope to the woman before she starts flagging down cars on the highway and soliciting. I'm willing to bet the only room in the house she damaged was the bedroom from excessive use. His counterpart appeared uneasy, but Dean seized the envelope from her and thrust it into my hand. I noted it was packed with $100 bills. I understand you're not accustomed to getting paid unless you're lying down, but don't fret. You'll be back in that position soon. I fought the urge to throw the money at him, opting for practicality over wounded pride. Turning on my heel, I marched to my worn-out car and drove off, wiping away tears that blurred my view of Dean holding Tom the cat in his arms in front of what used to be my home, reflected in the cracked rearview mirror. It brought to mind another old saying, one from Shelley's grandmother. If you ever want to feel wealthy, count all the things you possess that money can't purchase.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
I was sitting at the dining table, sipping my coffee when Kathy sat down across from me with an unusual expression on her face. I could tell something was coming, but I had no idea what it would be. Taking a deep breath, she said, I have been having an affair with my boss Alex. The words were blunt, without the hesitations or stammering he might have expected from someone making such a confession. She didn't seem apologetic or even guilty. Instead, she explained it as though it were a choice he simply needed to accept. I will make sure that you get your share of physical intimacy, she promised, as if it were some kind of consolation prize. I'll make sure you're not left out, Ben. But you need to understand. I felt a mix of disbelief and insult building in my chest. There was an absurdity to it that nearly made me laugh, but I held it back and looked her in the eyes. This woman I had been married to for 3 years was sitting across from me, calmly suggesting that we continue our marriage while she maintained an open affair. I wondered if I had ever truly known her. After a moment of silence, I couldn't hold back anymore. A short, dry laugh escaped my lips and I shook my head. Kathy, if you think I'm going to sit here and go along with this, you don't know me at all. You don't get to just throw your decisions at my face and expect that I'll accept your affair. I am not your doormat. You need to find yourself a divorce lawyer. She stared back at me, surprised by my response. Maybe she thought I would be passive, or maybe she thought I needed her enough to tolerate anything. But her expression changed as she realized I was serious. She hadn't expected me to be that blunt. As I pushed my chair back, ready to leave, Kathy's expression darkened. There was something menacing in her eyes, a sharpness I'd never seen before. She leaned forward, her voice low and steady. Ben, sit down. You don't get to just walk out on this conversation. I stopped and looked at her. She met my gaze, her lips curving into a cold, almost smug smile. You think you can just leave, find a lawyer, and be done with me, she said. No, Ben, that's not how this is going to work. I stared at her. Really? You think your threats will work? It will, she said, leaning in even closer. If you try to walk away from me like this, I will ruin you. Do you understand? I'll go to the police. I'll tell them you hit me, that you threatened me. Her words were calm, almost casual. They'll believe me, Ben. Who do you think they'll trust? A well-respected attorney, or some accountant nobody's ever heard of? She tilted her head, watching me. You think you'll just pick up and move on, but I'll make sure you have nothing left. I'll make sure you're begging to come back. I couldn't believe this was the same person I'd married. It was like I was staring at a stranger, someone who didn't care about destroying everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built. She looked at me as though she already knew I'd give in, as though she was certain I wouldn't dare to risk the nightmare she was threatening. So, here's how this is going to go, she continued. You'll stay, you'll play along, and you'll keep your mouth shut, or I will take everything from you and burn it to the ground. Your choice, Ben. I was still reeling from Kathy's threat when she leaned back in her chair, almost as if she'd made up her mind about something. She crossed her arms, a smug look on her face. Oh, and one more thing, Ben, she said, her tone dripping with condescension. I think it's time you meet Alex. He's coming over tomorrow. I blinked, barely processing her words. What, are you really that dumb? You heard me. She smiled, a twisted, mocking expression. He wants to meet you, and I want you to be on your best behavior. Be a nice boy for me, Ben. The humiliation cut deep, but I stayed silent, waiting for her to finish. I expect you to make him comfortable. Offer him a drink, maybe even a snack, she continued, as if she were dictating some normal household errand. Who knows? Maybe he'll even be nice to you. I clenched my fists under the table, the anger bubbling up, but I forced myself to hold my tongue. She was looking at me, daring me to push back, to say something, anything that would give her more power over me. Do you think it is a good idea, Kathy? What makes you think you can pull this off? I said with a calm voice. Kathy leaned in, her smile fading, replaced by a hardness I hadn't seen before. Because I can, Ben. Because this is my life, and I'll do what I want. And if you want to keep a shred of dignity, you'll do exactly as I say. I'll see you and Alex here tomorrow, and you'd better make a good impression. Kathy, have you heard of Newton's laws of physics? For every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. However, with me the action might be something that you may not like. Rest, it's your call. This is the last suggestion that I will give you. Talk to your lawyer, don't make it messy. This marriage is over. Walk away while I still allow you to walk. Your threats will never work on me, because I have an alpha male in my life. You are nothing. With that, she got up and left the room, leaving me there alone. It was clear. This wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a battlefield, and now I needed hit back. The next evening, I was sitting alone in the living room, nursing a glass of Jack Daniels, trying to steel myself for the absurdity that was about to unfold. I heard the front door open, Kathy's voice full of forced cheer as she greeted him. I took a long sip, watching as she led him into the room, her hand resting on his shoulder like he was some prized trophy. Then I got my first look at him. Alex was shorter than I'd imagined, fat. I felt a laugh bubbling up in my chest, and before I could stop myself, it slipped out. The whole thing was so ridiculous I could hardly believe it. This was the so-called alpha that Kathy had thrown everything away for? I looked him up and down, shaking my head, the laugh turning into a scoff. He was just 5 feet tall and shorter than Kathy. This leprechaun? I said, pointing at him, barely able to keep the smirk off my face. This is the guy you call an alpha male, Kathy? He does not even need to dress for Halloween. He can just wear a green suit and he will be a leprechaun. Kathy's smile wavered, a flash of irritation crossing her face, but she tried to hide it. Watch your mouth, Ben, she snapped, her voice low and cold. Alex is everything you're not. Confident, assertive, a real alpha man. Oh, really? I said, leaning back and taking another sip of my drink, feeling a rush of defiance. If this is what you think an alpha looks like, Kathy, maybe I was giving you way too much credit. Alex looked at me, glancing at Kathy as if he was looking for some kind of cue. I could see he didn't expect me laughing at him. It was hard not to find the whole scene a little comedic. Tell me, Alex, I said, unable to resist, how does it feel to come here, into my home, and play house with my wife? His face reddened, his attempt at bravado crumbling, and he shot another uncertain look at Kathy. Enough, Ben. Kathy hissed, her eyes blazing. I told you to be respectful. Respectful? I said, letting out a humorless chuckle. I'm supposed to be respectful? You bring this hobbit in here, throw him in my face, and expect me to roll over and play nice? I could see her seething, but it didn't matter. Alex's face turned red as he tried to regain his composure, but his voice was dripping with anger. Listen, Ben, he said, his tone sharp and cocky. You think you're going to just walk away from this? I don't think so. Kathy and I have talked it over, and we'll make sure you end up with nothing. In the divorce, I'll make sure she takes everything, right down to the shirt on your back. He took a step closer, a smug smile forming on his face. And by the way, after we're done here tonight, I'll be sleeping with her in your bed. I held my ground, meeting his gaze without a hint of intimidation. Really, Alex? You think you can just waltz in here, throw around a few threats, and walk away with my life? Trust me, he said, with a dismissive wave of his hand. We'll take the house, the car, your job's income, everything. And we'll make sure you regret ever standing up to her. I raised an eyebrow. The house? I asked, barely able to contain my laughter. That house isn't even mine, Alex. It belonged to my mother. I just live here. You won't get a penny from it. Alex's face faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered, shifting to his next weapon. Fine, but we'll still take your job's income. Kathy deserves it, and I'll make sure you're paying her for the rest of your life. I couldn't help but smirk, taking another slow sip of my drink. Sorry to disappoint you, Alex, but I already resigned from my job. What? Alex's smug expression finally cracked, his eyes darting to Kathy as if she'd somehow betrayed him. He looked completely blindsided. That's right, I continued, feeling a surge of satisfaction. So, no assets, no job, no income for you to leech off. I guess that little plan of yours isn't quite as airtight as you thought. Kathy glared at me, clearly caught off guard and furious, while Alex stood there, struggling to process the situation. I could see the gears turning in his head, realizing that the payday he'd counted on was slipping away. I looked between the two of them, finally feeling in control of my own life again. So, Alex, I said, my tone calm but pointed, why don't you rethink exactly what it is you think you're taking from me? Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you're the one who's got nothing. Alex's face twisted with a smug grin as he leaned in closer, his voice dripping with arrogance. You're not in charge here, Ben, he said, practically taunting me. I'm the alpha now, and you'll do what you're told. In fact, I think I'll take Kathy upstairs to your bed, right now. There's nothing you can do about it. I set my glass down slowly, my blood boiling as I looked him dead in the eyes. Alex, I said, keeping my voice steady, I'm warning you. Get out of my house. Right now. But instead of backing down, he laughed, a harsh, mocking sound, and before I could react, he slapped me across the face, hard. The slap stung, but the fury it ignited inside me was something else entirely. He straightened up, looking at me with a smirk, clearly enjoying himself. You really think you can stand up to me? He sneered. Guys like you are just all air and no substance. I'm the real deal, and I can destroy you, Ben. You're nothing. Men like me are in control, and I'll make sure you rot in jail if you try anything. You'll be begging for mercy by the time I'm done with you. The slap stung, but it gave me a smile. Ben felt the slap sting his cheek, and something in him snapped. All the humiliation, the rage, the months of disrespect, they boiled over, breaking through the restraint he'd tried to hold on to. He stood up from his chair, his fists clenched, his voice low and steady. You think you're the real deal, Alex? Ben's fist connected with Alex's jaw, and he went stumbling back, barely able to react before Ben hit him again, then again. With every punch, Ben let out the words he'd been holding back. You think you're the real deal, Alex? He said, a dark determination settling over him. Real men don't try to tear apart other people's lives. Real men don't walk into another man's home and act like they own it. And they don't ruin marriages for their own ego. You're nothing, Alex. Real men protect their families. Another punch landed squarely on Alex's ribs, and Ben heard a satisfying crack. Real men have integrity. Alex was gasping now, trying to put his hands up in defense, but Ben didn't stop. Each punch was a release, each hit an exorcism of the anger that had been building for so long. Finally, Ben picked Alex up in his hands, looked him in the eyes and said, I am no alpha or a beta, I am the man. With that he hoisted Ben over his head and slammed him down on the floor. Alex was crumpled on the floor, bruised and beaten. Ben took a step back, breathing hard, his chest heaving as he looked down at the man who had thought he could come into his life and tear it apart. Kathy stood frozen for a moment, her eyes wide with disbelief as she watched Alex crumble to the ground, bloodied and bruised. Her hands trembled, rage and fear mixing inside her. Without thinking, she rushed at Ben, her fists flying, pounding uselessly against his back in a desperate attempt to make him stop. But before she could land another punch, a woman's firm grip seized her wrists, yanking her backward. Kathy let out a startled scream as she was pulled off balance, spinning around to face her attacker. The woman holding her was tall, with short-cropped hair and an intense, unwavering gaze. Her grip was unrelenting, like iron around Kathy's wrists. Kathy tried to struggle, but the woman was too strong, her movements calculated, swift, and controlled. Let me go, Kathy screamed, jerking her arms, but the woman's hold tightened. No, the woman, Linda, said, her voice low and commanding. You're done. With an almost terrifying ease, Linda twisted Kathy's arms behind her, forcing her to her knees. Kathy gasped, unable to fight back as Linda used her body's weight to slam Kathy down onto the floor beside Alex. Linda wasn't done yet, though. She stepped back, assessing Kathy for a moment, and then, With savage precision, she began delivering a series of brutal blows. Her fists came down with unyielding force, landing against Kathy's chest and stomach. Her strikes a mixture of speed and power that only someone trained in hand-to-hand combat could deliver. Each punch knocked the wind out of Kathy, and she could barely gasp for breath between the hits. Kathy tried to shield herself, but it was useless. Linda moved like a storm, relentless and unstoppable. The former Marine was no stranger to fighting, and she showed it as she hammered into Kathy. Ben, still catching his breath, stood there for a moment, unsure of what had just happened. He turned to Linda, her stance strong, calm, and confident, as if she had just neutralized a threat with ease. "I don't think she's going to be causing you any more problems," Linda said with a grim satisfaction, watching as Kathy lay there, gasping for breath. "She's learned the hard way what happens when you mess with the wrong people." Ben thanked Linda for staying hidden during the confrontation and helping him out with Kathy, as he could never raise his hand on a woman. The police and medics arrived shortly after Linda had finished with Kathy and Alex, their sirens wailing in the distance as they rushed into the house. Ben stood in the corner, trying to steady himself, watching as they took control of the scene. Alex was barely conscious, his face swollen and bloodied, while Kathy was sitting up, her eyes wide with a mix of rage and fear. Both of them were swiftly loaded into ambulances and carted off to the hospital, where the real fallout would begin. Once they arrived, the officers continued their questioning. Alex, still groggy from the beating, attempted to assert himself, despite the pain. He was sitting up on a hospital bed, his voice shaking but filled with defiance. "I want to file a complaint against Ben," Alex demanded, trying to muster what little bravado he had left. "He attacked me in cold blood, and I want charges pressed." The officer, a middle-aged man with a no-nonsense look, flipped his notebook closed with a slow, deliberate motion, his gaze never leaving Alex. "You sure about that?" the cop asked, his voice low, his tone suddenly colder than it had been. "You realize who you're talking about, right?" Alex, trying to regain some control of the situation, looked confused. "What are you talking about?" The officer leaned in, lowering his voice as he spoke. "Ben's a former biker, associated with a pretty notorious biker gang. The kind of people you don't want to mess with. If you file that complaint, you won't just be dealing with him. You'll be dealing with all of them." Alex's bravado began to crack. His eyes widened, and his throat tightened as the realization hit him. The cop didn't stop there. "This beating," the officer continued, a hard edge to his words, "it'd be a cakewalk compared to what might come your way if you make this a police matter. Are you man enough to take on all of them? Because I can guarantee you, if you push this, it's not just going to be Ben knocking on your door." Alex gulped, his hands shaking now. He glanced over at the officer, then back down at his own bruised and battered body. The image of Ben's fists, the way they had hammered him into submission, was still fresh in his mind. But now, the idea of dealing with an entire gang of bikers, people who probably had no problem taking things further than just a few punches, left him terrified. Alex's face paled. His eyes darted around the room as if looking for an escape, but there was none. He couldn't stop thinking about what the officer had just said. Ben and his gang weren't people to be taken lightly. "No," Alex muttered, his voice trembling. "No, I won't file anything. Forget I said anything." His bravado had evaporated, replaced by an overwhelming sense of dread. The officer nodded, closing his notebook with a snap and standing up. "Good choice. I'd advise you to keep your distance from Ben and from anyone connected to him. You wouldn't want to end up regretting this further." Alex didn't respond. His mind was already racing, the fear of what might come next flooding his thoughts. He had no idea what he'd gotten himself into, but one thing was certain. This was far from over, and he wasn't ready to face the consequences of angering someone like Ben, or worse, his associates. Kathy stood outside the hospital room, her face bruised but mostly intact, a deep anger still simmering inside her. She was determined to confront Alex and make sure they both stuck to the plan. She had been humiliated and beaten, but she wasn't going to let Ben get away with it. She would file for divorce, destroy him, and leave him with nothing. That was the plan, at least. She walked into Alex's room, her steps purposeful. He was sitting on the bed, his face a mess of cuts and swelling, but his eyes were sharp. When he saw Kathy, he looked up at her, clearly still shaken from the beating he had taken earlier. Kathy was ready to lash out, to demand that they stay strong and finish what they had started. But as soon as she stepped inside, Alex's reaction was not what she expected. "Leave me alone, Kathy," Alex said, his voice hoarse. I don't want anything to do with this anymore. I value my life. You've really gotten us into something we should have never been part of. It's bigger than I thought. Kathy stared at him, stunned. What are you talking about? She demanded, stepping closer. We can still make this work. I'll divorce him. Take everything. No, Alex cut her off, his eyes wide with fear. You don't understand. If you value your life, you need to drop everything, leave Ben, and get out of town. Now. Kathy blinked in confusion. What are you saying? What do you mean, leave him? Alex swallowed hard, shifting uncomfortably on the bed. He hesitated for a long moment before finally speaking again, his voice trembling. Ben isn't just some guy you can divorce and walk away from. He's connected. He was part of a biker gang, a really dangerous one. I don't know all the details, but I know enough. People like him don't just let things go. If you go after him, if you try to take anything from him, he'll come after you, Kathy. And trust me, it won't be a slap across the face. It'll be worse. Kathy's heart started to race. She'd known Ben had a rough past, but she had always assumed it was just that, a past. She had no idea just how dangerous his past really was. Alex was shaking now, the fear in his eyes palpable. Ben's not just a regular guy, Kathy. I was stupid to think we could take him on. If you file for divorce and try to take anything from him, you'll be marked. You're dealing with a whole other level of danger. And it's not just Ben. You're going to piss off the whole gang. You won't get away. They'll find you. They'll make your life hell. You need to leave, and you need to leave now. No divorce, no nothing. Just go. Kathy stood frozen, her thoughts racing. Alex's words felt like a slap in the face, but the fear in his eyes was real. This wasn't some idle threat. Ben's past was something far more dangerous than she had ever realized. She had always seen Ben as weak, someone she could control, but now it was clear that she had underestimated him and his past. The man who had once seemed like the perfect victim was something far darker, something she had never anticipated. I didn't know, Kathy muttered, almost to herself. Her mind was spinning. She had made so many plans for revenge, for taking everything from Ben, but now, she wasn't sure she could follow through. What Alex was saying made too much sense. Alex, Kathy said, her voice trembling. What do I do now? Alex's voice dropped to a whisper. You do nothing. You walk away, quietly. If you try to drag this out, if you try to take him down, you're not just fighting him. You're fighting everything he's connected to, and you'll lose. You need to leave him, and leave now. Before it's too late. Kathy looked at him, her hands shaking. She was trapped in a nightmare she had created. The fear settled in deep, a cold, terrifying truth creeping over her. She wasn't the one in control anymore. And it was clear now. If she didn't listen to Alex, if she didn't just walk away and disappear, Ben's world was going to consume her whole. The atmosphere in town shifted in the days following Kathy's hasty decision. The sound of roaring engines filled the streets, 70 bikers, each on their massive machines, patrolling with a steady, intimidating presence. Their thunderous engines reverberated through every corner of the town, a constant reminder of the power that lay behind Ben's past. It was as if the very air had thickened with tension. Kathy, her resolve broken and her mind clouded with fear, wasted no time. She met with Alex's lawyer, signed the divorce papers, and walked away with nothing. No assets, no custody. The settlement was a stark reminder of just how little control she had left over her own life. Alex had assured her it was for the best, but deep down, Kathy knew she was leaving town not just to escape Ben, but to save whatever was left of her life. 5 days after signing the papers, Kathy was gone. She packed her things quickly, taking only what she could carry, and left without a word to anyone in town. She disappeared as swiftly as she had come, her name now just another whisper in the wind. But Alex was not as fortunate. Despite his earlier bravado, his encounter with Ben's world had only just begun. For the 7 days he spent in the hospital, recovering from his injuries, a constant presence lingered by his bedside. Every day, without fail, 2 bikers arrived during visiting hours. They never spoke to him. They never touched him. They didn't need to. They simply sat quietly, their gazes fixed on him, unwavering and cold. Every time he woke up, groggy and in pain, those 2 men were there, silently watching. It wasn't just a warning, it was a message. Each visit was like a reminder that Alex had crossed a line, and now he was at the mercy of forces far beyond his understanding. They didn't need to speak. Their presence alone was enough to keep him in a constant state of fear. The days dragged on, and Alex couldn't shake the feeling that he was being sized up, judged. not just for what he had done, but for what he might do next. And every time he looked up at them, he realized there was nothing he could do. His fate had already been sealed, and it was no longer in his hands after 7 days, when Alex was finally discharged from the hospital, knowing that he had narrowly escaped a fate far worse than anything he had ever imagined. He learned the hard way that not all battles were meant to be fought, and not all men could be intimidated. Some men had entire worlds behind them, worlds that didn't need to raise a finger to bring you to your knees. His trip from hospital to home was again a nightmare. 70 bikes escorted him. Alex's life after his release from the hospital was a slow unraveling. At first, he tried to go about his normal routine, but everywhere he went, he couldn't escape the ever-present eyes of the bikers. They were always there, lurking in the background, at the gas station, on street corners, in the shadows of alleyways. No matter how fast or far he tried to run, they were always one step behind, watching, waiting. At first, he thought it was a coincidence. Maybe it was just paranoia, a product of the brutal beatdown he had endured. But as the days passed, the reality set in. They weren't just following him, they were making sure he couldn't escape. Wherever he went, wherever he tried to hide, there they were, 2 or 3 of them, always just within his sight. Silent, unmoving, watching him like predators waiting for the moment to strike. Alex tried to summon the courage to do something about it. He thought about going to the police. He had an entire story to tell, about Kathy, about Ben, about the threats, the gang, the constant surveillance. But every time he tried to take action, something stopped him. It was the sight of the bikers that paralyzed him with fear, that deep, gnawing anxiety in his gut. He couldn't shake the feeling that even if he went to the cops, it would do no good. They were everywhere. Then, one day, just as Alex was heading to the local police station, something stopped him cold. He was walking down the sidewalk when he spotted a familiar figure across the street, none other than the town's police chief. But what caught Alex off guard wasn't just seeing him. It was the leather biker jacket the chief was wearing. The very same one that the bikers wore, the one with the unmistakable patch. Alex's heart dropped into his stomach. The realization hit him like a freight train. This wasn't just a local gang. This was their town. The bikers weren't just some rogue group of criminals. They were embedded in the very fabric of the community, with their reach extending into every corner, including the police force itself. He froze, staring at the police chief, whose face betrayed no emotion as he walked past. The chief didn't even glance at Alex. But the message was clear. There was no escaping this. The town was under the control of people who answered to a much darker force than Alex had ever realized. Alex's thoughts began to spiral. He could no longer ignore it. The bikers weren't just following him. They were controlling him, making sure he understood that there was no safe place, no way out. His every move was being watched, not just by the bikers, but by the very institution he had once believed would protect him. With no other options left, Alex knew what he had to do. He couldn't stay. He couldn't fight. Not against Ben's world. Not against the bikers who seemed to have infiltrated every part of town. He had no choice but to leave. That night, Alex packed what little he had left. He didn't tell anyone. There was no point. The bikers had won. They had broken him, cornered him, and now, they had made sure he had nowhere to run, no one to turn to. The last thing he could do was disappear, to vanish from this place that had been his home, before they made the decision for him. The next morning, he was gone, leaving behind everything he had once known. As he drove away from the town that had suffocated him, Alex couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief. He was no longer hounded, no longer watched, but at the same time, he knew that wherever he went, wherever he tried to hide, the shadows would always be there, waiting. The bikers had marked him, and Ben's world, with its endless reach, would never let him forget it. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
I am a late 30s average office worker. I've lived my life diligently, and a few years ago, I got married and now live with my beautiful little princess, forming a family of 3. Having worked hard, I've earned the title of manager and hold a good reputation within the company. This might be due to my inability to outright refuse requests, a trait of my personality. Being tall and having a likable face might have also worked in my favor with the ladies. At times, I've been angry with myself for being too naive and unable to refuse requests. However, it's not in my nature to speak ill of others. Thus, I ended up fulfilling various favors without looking out for my own interests until I met a great mentor who helped develop my capabilities. About a year ago, our team embarked on a major project. We worked tirelessly, staying late and working over the weekends. Without a break, the project had a deadline, and we needed to deliver the results by then. It was not something we could postpone, especially since it required direct reports to the executives, leaving no room for mediocrity. I was appointed as the leader of this crucial project. The responsibility weighed heavily on me, and despite only being able to motivate my team members, I ended up resolving many issues myself. Ultimately, the project we submitted was selected, bringing significant profits to the company. Having had mediocre promotions and evaluations until then, seeing my efforts finally shine was immensely gratifying. The higher-ups must have acknowledged this achievement as they arranged a grand dinner for us at an expensive venue, paid for with a corporate card. My team members and I were thrilled, indulging in the lavish food voraciously. Naturally, the dinner included alcohol, and as we drank one glass after another, we began to feel the effects. Just as we were about to wrap up and move to a second location, an executive arrived and settled the bill with the corporate card. The executive is a woman. From what I've heard, she's one of the founding members of the company. Despite being in her late 50s, she is tall and remarkably slender. Her face, reminiscent of a cat's, retains its beauty even as she ages. Not only is she striking in appearance, but her capabilities are also exceptional. It's said that she comes from a well-off family and had the privilege of studying abroad, playing a key role in establishing the company. She is known for her meticulousness in work, to the extent that not even a needle could slip through. Rumor has it that even someone as formidable as her has experienced her share of hardships. At the height of her career, her husband was involved in an accident and has been bedridden in a hospital for years. There was a time when people in the company criticized her for focusing on work, while her husband was in such a condition. I had always perceived her as a strict and unyielding figure. Thus, meeting her towards the end of the dinner was quite surprising. I was so nervous that I hardly remember what I said. As my team members were heading to the next venue, I thought it best to excuse myself. I handed her the corporate card she had brought and sent them off, leaving just the two of us. Strangely, despite the occasion being a celebration, I felt uneasy about the high cost of the meal and even found the situation a bit intimidating. So I told her, "I'll be heading home now. Thank you for coming all the way here late at night." She waved her hand dismissively and said, "I came to encourage you all, no worries. Anyway, where do you live?" It turned out I lived in the same direction as her. Caught off guard, she quickly said, "It's on my way. I can just get off first. Let's share a ride." And with that, she opened the door and got into the car. Unsure of what to do, but feeling it would be rude to refuse, I ended up sitting in the passenger seat next to the driver. Glancing through the rearview mirror, it seemed that the executive, perhaps due to exhaustion, had fallen asleep during the short 15-minute ride home. I too relaxed a bit during the journey, and before I knew it, we had arrived at her house. When the driver tried to wake her, she wouldn't budge, resulting in me having to help her out. It turned out she had already had a drink before coming to our dinner payment. Given the situation, and the fact that I was a man. I ended up carrying her inside her house. The driver, who also seemed to fulfill some secretarial duties, opened the door for us, and I laid her down in her bedroom. The driver only opened the door and didn't follow us inside. After covering her with a blanket, I was about to leave when she grabbed my arm. She was lying down just as I had left her, but now, with her eyes open, holding onto me. Then she asked if I would like to have another drink with her. Startled, I stuttered, "Ah, you're awake? How could I drink in the house of a woman whose husband is?" Trailing off before I could finish, she chuckled, sat up at the edge of the bed and said, "My husband, he's been bedridden for over 10 years until recently, when he moved into a nursing home. There's no hope of him getting up, and now I'm truly alone." I was caught off guard, not only by the news of her husband's condition, but also by her invitation to drink. Before I could respond, she went to the kitchen to prepare some drinks. In the ensuing awkward atmosphere, we began to sip our drinks in silence. She served an incredibly expensive wine, and it was my first time realizing wine could taste so exquisite. I quickly emptied my glass, prompting her to ask if I was in a hurry to get home. Caught off guard, I blurted out, "No, not at all. It's just that I've never tasted such delicious wine before. I'm sorry if I seemed upset." To my surprise, the previously icy executive suddenly burst into laughter, tears even welling up in her eyes. After laughing for a while, she suddenly moved closer to me and asked, "Did you say you were married? That you had a baby recently?" as she placed her hand on my chest. Confused by the situation, I took a step back and simply replied, "Yes, that's correct." She then frowned and stared at me intensely. Honestly, at that moment, she didn't seem to be someone 15 years my senior. She appeared much younger, better maintained than women in their 30s and 40s, my peers. She was naturally beautiful, and her age added a sense of allure. Nervously swallowing, she pressed her lips against mine. She kissed me passionately, as if to devour my lips, pushing me back to the edge of the bed. It might sound like an excuse, but I spent the night in a drunken haze. Morning came, and as I was hastily putting on my clothes, I saw her reading documents while sipping coffee. She was wearing a thin silk robe, which only added to her beauty. She no longer seemed the cold, unapproachable figure, but rather more charming as a woman. That's probably why I found myself staring at her until she noticed me. Seeing me just staring blankly, she smiled warmly. She then offered me some snacks and even gave me an expensive suit to change into. I couldn't help but wonder what had happened in just a day, yet I didn't feel bad about it, especially considering I had been feeling drained from endless household chores and child care. It's a terrible thought, but her allure was heightened in comparison to my wife, who only wears tracksuits every day. Since then, the executive and I have occasionally met in private. More often than not, it was she who took the initiative, leaving me flustered on numerous occasions. Whenever we found ourselves alone in the company elevator, she would playfully tap my behind or subtly grasp my hand, finding my surprised reactions amusing and provoking even more teasing behavior. One day, I found her husband at her house. As she approached me, I gave her a look, to which she responded, "It's okay. You can relax. Have you grown tired of me lately?" Vigorously shaking my head in response. She then said, "Can we talk comfortably when we're alone? Call me by my name, will you?" in a voice as soft as a baby's. Eventually, I found myself enjoying these situations. When work exhausted me and I felt belittled by my wife's nagging at home, being called out by her actually became a source of happiness. Initially, my wife was suspicious, but when I explained, I was with the executive. How could I refuse when she keeps calling me? Everyone else is dying to get noticed by her. She didn't say much. Without explicitly denying it, my wife never seemed to imagine the executive was a woman. Now, if I don't go out on weekends, my wife is the one to ask, "Has the executive not been calling you lately?" Of course, at first, she wasn't pleased with how often I had to go out, even for work. However, as I started meeting with the executive more frequently and got promoted faster than others, it seemed to satisfy her. To my wife, my promotion seemed more important than me diligently doing household chores or parenting. Thanks to the promotion, my salary and bonuses significantly increased. With this heightened income, I found myself treating my wife better, albeit with a strange sense of guilt. After the initial promotion, I even thought about taking the executive on a trip to spend more time together. So I sent my wife, our child, and her family on a vacation, despite my inability to attend due to work commitments. Everyone was pleased when I offered to cover the travel expenses. These actions may not truly reflect my capabilities, but it did feel gratifying to be able to strut a bit in front of my in-laws. I have now come to accept my relationship with the executive to some extent, though not exactly enjoy it. I've started exercising, something I previously avoided, and have been diligently taking care of my skin. At times, it felt as if I had to present myself as a more satisfactory product to the executive, which brought on moments of realization about my situation. After going through that phase, my perspective shifted to, this is also part of social life. Given the circumstances, I find myself wanting to make the best use of this relationship with the executive until she no longer needs me. Just a year ago, I considered myself a kind and caring person to those around me. However, as my position and opportunities for personal gain increased, I've become more pragmatic. While I acknowledge that these were my choices, and I must deal with them, there's an indescribable unease and guilt that sometimes arises within me.